Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this final witness session of our inquiry panel studying the economic vitality of rural and coastal areas in Cornwall. This inquiry is being held virtually using Microsoft Teams, and I would like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone to today's session. I'm Councillor Peter Lebroy, Chairman of this inquiry process. I'm joined by Councillors Jim Mckenna, Mike Mclennan and Jane Pascoe. Today we're supported by David Rodder, who's an Economic Growth Manager in Cornwall Council, who is our Technical Officer, and Lynn Davey, our Democratic and Governance Officer, who has oversight of the process. The session is not being held in public, but a recording will be made available on the Council's website for viewing by the public. The objectives on the inquiry terms of reference are as follows: to review the current state of the economy in rural and coastal areas in Cornwall and to consider future economic forecasts if current trends continue, for example, sector mix, economic performance, employment, salary levels, population levels and so on. And also to consider the necessary and desirable interactions between the rural economy and local towns in Cornwall. Also to consider what support is already available and planned for rural and coastal areas in Cornwall, and to investigate alternative methods of stimulating the economy of rural and coastal areas. And by doing that, we will probably be taking evidence from other parts of the UK and the European Union, possibly even further beyond. And also to consider the potential impact of the different intervention strategies and to make recommendations on how Council can contribute and support the development of the economy in rural and coastal areas in Cornwall. The process considers a number of recorded evidence gathering sessions. This is the final. I can't remember whether it's 6 or 8, but Lynn will tell me at the end. Supported by organisational sessions and briefing information. We're taking witness evidence today from people who've got particular experience and knowledge to help us. We value the input of all witnesses who give up their valuable time to take part in our process and thank them for their input. With regards to the questioning of witnesses, the process for each will be the same. Each witness will be asked to briefly introduce themselves, be allowed approximately 10 to 15 minutes to present their views and position on the rural and coastal vitality in Cornwall. Also to outline 3 or 4 key recommendations they might feel would help stimulate rural and coastal areas. Once we've done that, we'll go into a relatively formal exchange between the councillors on the panel and our witnesses and have effectively a chat and just an examination of the ideas and suggestions perhaps that you've brought forward. Only inquiry panels may ask the witnesses questions. Other council members are very welcome to attend and observe proceedings. I'll give them the opportunity to comment at the end of each witness session, although if time becomes limited, this may need to be at the end of the evidence gathering session as a whole. Due to limited time, I'll try to make sure that questions and answers are kept as succinct as possible, particularly as there could be supplementary questions based on other questions. We can always seek further written clarification should that be necessary. I'm not going to go with X's and boxes today. What I'll do is I'll come to the councillors individually and ask them to have an interaction with the witnesses. But if anybody does feel the burning desire to speak out of turn, then do put an X in a box. Once witnesses have finished giving evidence, they're more than welcome to stay for the remainder of the session as an observer. Councillors, please be aware that this session will be made available to the public. Can we all please engage with the principles of inquiry and that we should be engaging with our witnesses to receive evidence that will support our recommendations. Our own personal opinions and observations are not necessarily of primary concern in these sessions, so please keep those to a minimum where possible. So without further ado, Ashley, thank you very much indeed for attending our session. It has been a fascinating process so far, and we've really learnt an awful lot from various different people. One of the most interesting witnesses that we had, I'm going to forget the guy's name now, but it was Cornish Lithium. Jeremy Rathall came forward, and we could have probably spent all afternoon with him, to be honest. I'm raising the bar for you, Ashley. Sorry. You obviously represent the minerals and mining interests of Cornwall. It's not something I'm particularly familiar with because I personally come from the north. I'm up in Bude, and there isn't any mining at all up here. I did go to college in St Austell, so I do remember driving past all the Cornish Alps on many occasions. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Ashley. Welcome to our session.
Okay, thank you. So the first thing I'll say is I know Jeremy Rathall very well because we are working very, very closely together on exactly Jeremy's dream for, and actually my dream as well, for potential lithium business to develop in Cornwall. So a little introduction about myself. I know Bude quite well because I'm a Lanston boy. I was born and bred in Lanson. My parents used to live in Weeks and Mary. I went to college in Lanson College, where I did my O and A levels. I left college in 1985, and I joined the then ECLP, or English China Clays, as a finance trainee. So that is just over 35 years ago, and I've been with English China Clays and/or Imerys Minerals ever since. So we were acquired by Imerys in 1999. And as a consequence of that, actually, when that happened, I was up living and working near London in the head office up there. As a consequence, I lost my job because they didn't want a head office in London. And I was fortunate that through that process, I came back down to Cornwall, and I've worked my way through the organisation such that I'm now basically the general manager of Imerys's mineral business in the UK, which is centred, still absolutely centred around Mid Cornwall, St Austell area. I live just outside St Austell, but we also have operations in Devon, in Dorset, in Staffordshire, in Humberside, in Eastern London, and various other parts of the UK. I'm married with two children, something I think is quite pertinent to this discussion. I have two children, Kieran, who's 24, and Jodie, who's 20. Both born and brought up in Cornwall. One went to Poltaire, one went to Penrice, one went to Cornwall College, one went to Truro College. They both ended up in university in Bath. My son, Kieran, now works for the Mercedes Formula One team. So they're having quite a good season again, thanks to Lewis Hamilton. But he now works for that Formula One team. He got a master's degree in electrical engineering from the City of Bath University, a first-class honours degree, and he typifies to me one of the main issues we have in Cornwall. How on earth do we keep talented people like that here, and give them opportunities here rather than losing them to companies like Mercedes up near Northampton? My daughter, Jodie, she's in her third and final year of her education degree, which is quite a different experience for any graduate at the moment with what's going on in the world. She's actually back home with us now, doing all of her tuition by the internet. And hopefully she will go into sort of early years learning as a teacher at some point in the next couple of years. So that as I said, I joined English China Clays back in '85 as a finance trainee. So my professional qualification is in finance, but I haven't actually done a finance-based role now for probably about 15 years, as I've moved through the organisation into now general management. And I think the story that's building around our industry, with tangents off into things like lithium, I think is quite an interesting one and relevant for this topic. I mentioned before I came on, my life these days is made up of, on average, probably 10 or 12 video calls a day. I've been based at home since the 30th of March. I don't like it. I increasingly don't like it because I'm not interacting with people, and now we're in the second lockdown. That's just got even worse. But I think the story of the China clay industry in Cornwall and in the UK is an interesting one, centered around this topic. And if I just use one example to illustrate that. We went. The industry's been through some really tough times. There is, nobody's trying to deny that. I joined an organisation that employed 6,000 people. St Austell and the surrounding villages was built on the industry. Many of the villages were actually built around the industry because they were in the way of the quarries, if you like. And so, there are few better examples of an industry and a community working hand in glove, if you like. But that industry doesn't employ that many people anymore. The markets that we serve, the competition that we have all fundamentally changed in the last 10 years, let alone the last 30 years. And so we've had to be creative to survive. And so, that's what we've endeavoured to do. And I sit here today with absolutely every confidence that we will still have a China clay industry based in Cornwall, for at least the next 20 years. Now, that's a long period of time to talk about in today's context, and especially given that, China clay was first discovered actually in Helston, not in St Austell, on Tregonning Hill. It'll be 275 years ago next year. Okay, so we hit our 275th anniversary next year of the discovery of China clay in Cornwall. So this is a pretty resilient business. And so when I say that, the context of lasting another 20 doesn't feel quite so much of a dream. Yeah. And what will determine whether we survive that length of time and maybe beyond? Clearly, we need to have the material in the ground, because that's what we do. We're extracting a natural mineral from the ground. But more importantly than that, we need to be able to competitively reach the markets that we serve. Brexit is a massive consideration for us. Why? Because basically 80% of what we produce in Mid-Cornwall is exported to about 80 different countries around the world. And so logistics and getting our product off the island is of huge consideration for us. And hence why, whatever happens with deal, no deal, trade deal, not trade deal, WTO, whatever it might end up looking like. And it's scary to think that, 6 weeks from needing to know all those answers, we still don't. That's really, really quite vital to how long this business will sustain itself. I suspect, the world is a little bit more resilient than the media may portray it. And therefore, real life won't be quite as dramatic as some commentators would like it to sound in relation to Brexit. And we will overcome it, like we've overcome many things in the past. And we will continue to serve global customers with a quality product that is now used in applications that, even 5-10 years ago, we wouldn't have dreamt of. Why have we got ourselves in that position? Because we invest a lot of money in technology, in clever scientific people from all around the world that we recruit in, from universities that are outside of the UK as well as inside the UK. And one of the reasons for that is that we're a multinational company. And so for a young graduate who may have graduated in chemical engineering in Birmingham, but might actually be somebody who originated in Somalia or wherever it might have been, actually joining a company like Imerys is a stepping stone to a career. And I think, relating to my experience with my children, I'm sat here talking about my proud 35 years having served this industry. Young people do not think like that. If I mention to my children, the prospect of them working for the same organization for 35 years, they glaze over, it goes right over the top of their head, and that is absolutely not what is in their mind. Yeah, I find young people today, they're much more motivated by the cause, by the purpose of what they're doing, by their interest, not so much by whether I can pay for the mortgage or not. Right now, clearly that comes into consideration, but my point is that the minds of young people today is really quite different than the minds of when I was a child. If I had £1 for everybody that told me I'd got a job for life, boy, when I joined ECC in 1985, I'd be close to a millionaire. But it was true back then. It is absolutely not true today. And even if it were true, our young people wouldn't believe it or be interested in it. And so for an organization like ours, we have to be prepared that people may come and join us. They may do a great job for us for a period of time, but they're not necessarily going to stay with us for 5 years, 10 years, let alone 30, 35. Now, obviously, I'm talking in general terms. There are young people that will do that. And so, we have had and continue to have a very active apprenticeship program. In the middle of the pandemic, we've taken, with our revenues, really suffering quite badly, we made a decision to bring in another 8 apprentices. okay, in various disciplines, and they're now starting their academic courses at whichever college. But we're fundamentally investing in the future and in a population of people that history tells us that there is a much better chance that those individuals will stay with industry and work the way through the industry than if we bring in slightly more academically qualified graduates that may come in from, say, Birmingham or wherever. They stay with us for 2, 3, 4 years, and then they want the next step, and they go off and work for us in the US or in Brazil or in Australia or wherever it might be. That the apprenticeship population tends to be a little bit more keen to stay local, if you like, right? And they like the area. They like where mum and dad brought them up. They like the fact that they've got a secure position that's got progression. And I could reel off quite comfortably 15, 20 names of people we have today running plants, running functions, senior engineers who all started as apprentices. I started as a finance trainee straight from Lancing College. Yeah, and I'm here now, as the general manager of the business. So you do get, there are examples. We shouldn't forget that there are examples of young people that can thrive and prosper in areas like Cornwall, because there are many of us that have done it. The bigger issue is that there aren't so many opportunities. Yeah, and the mindset of young people these days is the world is a small place, and I guess we have to look at life outside of the pandemic. The world is a small place. It's very easy to get from A to B. People are much more open to working abroad for a period of time, and that's how young people think. Yeah, and if I were to track the evolution of young people we've brought into the group and where they may be now, they're scattered all over the world. And they may have started working at, they may have been a degree student at Camborne School of Mines or CSM then in Penryn, and they may have joined us as a graduate, but they're quite probably now in Malaysia or Brazil or wherever. Yeah, having spent 2 or 3 really good years with us here in Cornwall. Why did they join us? We were up the road from CSM. Yeah. So a really quite interesting dynamic. One final point, if I could make, is in terms of the evolution of our business and something that we've tried to inject back into the community is we're very conscious that we used to employ 6,000 people. Today that's 1,000. We used to have a much more dominant impact on the local communities than we do today in today's world. But we can, and we are putting something back into those communities via things like the development of the Garden Village. Okay, so the West Carclave Garden Village, it is finally and thankfully started now on the ground. And that is fundamentally, that was always an employment-led initiative that used historical, redundant mining facilities of whatever nature in order to create something back into the community, very much including jobs. It wasn't just symbolic that we promoted the ESAM building as the first thing that happened in that garden village, right? And if I drive past there now and I look at the car park full of cars, it has had some degree of success, I would suggest. And there isn't a house built yet. Yeah, there's going to be a school there. There's going to be a community centre there. There's going to be workspace there. Yeah, that was always part of the thinking, because we're trying to use, we're not a house building company. We're not even the company doing the development. It's not our business. We know a bit about China clay. We don't know very much about building communities, but we can facilitate that process. And we can use our land to install solar farms that can produce the energy to power the homes. Yeah, and we can. We can facilitate, back to the example of lithium, the fact that it naturally occurs in our operations, and it's an industry we don't understand. It's not our market. We're not going to play in it, but there are those that do know those things, so we can facilitate the development of a lithium business. We have 12 renewable energy facilities in Mid Cornwall, right? Solar farms and wind turbines, much of which we consume back in the industry. You know, and why have we done that? Because we know what the global crisis looks like in terms of climate change. We know that we are somewhat disadvantaged in terms of location from the main energy generating facilities in the UK, and we know it's increasingly going to cost more and more money to get power to you. So we've adopted a policy of self-generation. So we generate 60% of our own electricity today through a combination of cogeneration plants and renewable energy facilities, and that percentage will carry on growing. And that in itself is creating jobs and opportunities for others. So it's a kind of an indirect benefit of the things that we are trying to do. Yeah. So I'll leave it there. I'm conscious of my 15 minutes. I could probably, like Jeremy, rattle on all afternoon. In fact, me and Jeremy together would be not a good combination.
But nevertheless, very interesting. I think I did say to Jeremy that next time he's down in Bude, let us know and he can come for dinner and keep us entertained for the evening. Ashley, thank you very much indeed. Really interesting. What I'll do is I'll come to the panel in just a moment. There's just one thing I wanted to ask you, if that's okay. And you said that 80% of your raw material or the product that you produce is exported, and you did mention that there are new and developing applications for it. And several times throughout this process that we're going through, we've talked about raw materials and added value and trying to harness the process of adding value to products maybe a little bit more locally. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit, if you know, and I know it's not necessarily your business, about the applications that your product is put to, and whether or not maybe any opportunities within Cornwall to look at some of those applications.
Well, okay, so I mean, traditionally, the vast majority of china clay that was consumed anywhere in the world, say 20 years ago, would have been dominated by two primary sectors: one, paper; two, ceramics. Okay, so the plates we eat our meals off, our bathroom suites, our tiles on our wall, the paper in the photocopier, all of that has very substantial loadings of china clay. It's one of it's where it was discovered. I mean, people were looking for china clay in China many thousands of years ago because of its use in ceramics, and that still exists to this day. So that's the traditional part of the business. It's what most providers can do, and therefore it's not so attractive from a commercial perspective anymore. But it does give you a base load, and we still supply hundreds of thousands of tons of material into those sectors. The areas which are more interesting to us these days, which are fed from the innovation, are what we generically call performance minerals. So products would include paints and coatings, glues and adhesives, pharmaceutical rubber, animal feed, cosmetics. What else can I think of? Lightweighting in cars. Automotive, really interesting market. Cars used to be relatively robust, metal-laden structures that were a lot less fuel efficient than today's alternatives. One of the main reasons why vehicles today of any type are more fuel efficient is because they're lighter, and they're lighter because the metal has been replaced by a plastic compound, not as controversial as the single-use plastics that we all hear about on a daily basis. What I'm talking about here is that now when you reverse your car in the car park into a bollard, you don't cause £300 worth of damage because you've kinked the metal. There's a crumple zone, right? It's a crumple zone made of plastic, right? In that plastic is mineral that we supply, right? Now, 20 years ago, that didn't exist. Yeah, so those are the sort of sectors now that we are finding, or our customers are coming to us to find solutions for, that are quite new, different, and very interesting. Cosmetics is a fantastic example. Up until probably only 5 years ago, most cosmetics contained so many nasty ingredients. We didn't realize it. None of the Joe public didn't realize it. But as people have become aware of it, they don't want to smear chemicals on their face or their arms anymore. They want something that's a natural alternative that allows them to still have the similar or better functionality while not being anything like as harmful for the planet as the previous ingredients. China clay is a fantastic example as a matting agent, as something that makes cosmetics more opaque. Our products naturally fit. So we supply L'Oreal now in 18 different countries, from mid Cornwall. All right. So those are the sort of sectors we're playing in now. Really difficult one, and back to your question is, what is there in Cornwall that we could nurture to develop more of that sort of thing? I would argue that the thing that we can nurture is what we've been doing, which is continually investing in our scientific capabilities, in our lab, our laboratories and the equipment we deploy. So what we've got in Parmore Centre now, and many people see Parmore Centre as being the head office of the local China Clay Company, but it's actually not. The two things are more or less independent. And the reason for that is that what we are doing in Parmore Centre today is we're looking at the portfolio of 20 different minerals that we have access to around the world, be it China clay, carbonate, diatomite, perlite, andalusite, bore clay. There are 31 industrial minerals, and we've got 28 of them in our portfolio. Well, what we do is we play with those 28 different minerals from all around the world, trying to match their capabilities with the market requirements of tomorrow. And so the people we're deploying in there are very clever, scientific, academically based people, but they're actually really quite independent from the core thing that you see, in terms of the local China clay production. So it's that is the thing, and the reason why Imerys has decided to really keep the level of investment up in that facility is because we've already got the facility, we've already got the ability to attract people to that location, and they can then do the work from there, noting that you're not going to keep those people forever. Those are the same people that are going to want to be going to to the US or to Singapore or wherever, and so we have a bit of migration. But fundamentally, the thing that's triggered all of that is having that technical base in Cornwall, because it's a nice place to live. We're nice people to do business with and to work with, and it gives you opportunities to either stay or just to move on and do something. So I don't think we necessarily need to try to move the markets to us. We need to facilitate the products that we have out into those markets, and lithium is exactly the same.
Yeah. Okay. Ashley, thanks. Fascinating. In a very similar way to Jeremy, I feel I could spend hours listening to you. Councillor Jim Mckenna, I think we'll let you go first for just an informal chat.
Peter, thank you. Councillor Jim Mckenna from Penzance, Ashley. I'm more familiar with things like fishing than China clay, I have to say. And as you can probably tell, though I share a birthday with St Piran, I'm not actually Cornish. So just a question really in relation to the comment you made about Brexit, and particularly the uncertainty in terms of getting your product to market. The local authority is working very closely with the fishing industry and Newlyn particularly. Are you getting what you need in terms of licensing and support and advice from that particular team?
No. I think, we're in a very fortunate position, okay, because we didn't just start exporting in the last couple of years. We're not a startup. We're a very long established organization, and therefore our supply chain and our network of contacts is really quite extensive. Now, one of the things that we did, and it was a decision that I made about 2.5 years ago. You may have heard of authorized economic operator status, AEO status.
Yeah.
The best analogy I can give, which is not a very good analogy, is that it's the export documentation equivalent of a fast track ticket at Legoland.
Fine.
All right. So you when you go to Legoland, you can buy a family pass and join the queue, or you can pay a little bit extra and you can jump the queue. Okay. We foresaw the potential problems with Brexit in terms of what we're likely to face in 6 weeks' time, and we went for an AEO accreditation about 2.5 years ago, and we were granted it 12 months ago.
Okay.
So we are now an AEO approved supplier, okay, which means that in terms of whatever documentation requirements come up, we've already ticked the boxes, right? As independently, accredited and audited by HMRC. So when our material arrives at those border points, they're not going to be put in a compound to check all the documentation. We've already got the quality assurance, yeah. And so our ability to move product by road, by train, by vessel is the least of my concerns right now, yeah. So we use chambers of commerce for some of our support. In fact, we do, and I've always used Bristol. I'm not particularly proud of that because I know the facility exists in Cornwall, but we've had a really, really good relationship and service from Bristol Chamber of Commerce for many years. But it's my overall point here is that it's a very mature, very well developed and understood part of our business.
Okay. Second question, if I may, Pete, just in relation to graduates and employment, actually, it's obviously brilliant that you are taking on still a good number of young people. Do you have what you need in terms of the training, the education within Cornwall through Campbell School of Mines or through University College Falmouth? And if not, is there any prospect of you talking to them so more sort of youngsters educated here might have a chance?
So, I mean, if I split my answer into two components, as far as apprentices are concerned, the main cohort of people we bring in are for engineering disciplines, because our plants of, over time, like every other business, we've automated. There's a lot more control in instrumentation, and so we kind of need almost less capable operatives, but more capable engineers. And so our apprentice scheme is devoted towards that. The previous cohort we brought in a couple of years ago, unfortunately, we made a choice to send them all to Plymouth. Okay, purely based on the lack of service and capability of Cornwall College in that area. They clearly know all this, but the good thing is they listened, because the latest cohort, all 8 of them, are back into Cornwall College, because we don't want to be putting young people on a train up to Plymouth every day. We'd much rather them, if they live in St Austell, that they can get into Jonkie House. So that's what we've been convinced sufficiently that Cornwall College have got themselves back in shape, and we're confident they will now do the good job they used to do for us before they started to fall away a little bit. So I think as far as and if I'm talking about IT apprentices or business administration apprentices, pretty much all the sectors that we would be interested in, I think there are reasonably good local options for us, which is great. On the CSM side, what is not quite so great is something that's happened in the last few weeks and months, is they've now pulled their mining engineering graduate program. And I could, just like I could reel off 15 names of people we employ today who've succeeded through apprenticeships, I could probably do the same in terms of our more capable mining engineers, site managers who've graduated through CSM. Now, if they're not running a mining engineering course, that taps off a source of really successful recruitment that we've benefited from for many years. So I'm sure it's the laws of supply and demand, and CSM are unlikely to run a course just because of IMRIS. I understand that, but my point is, it not being there is going to mean that we'll still source those people, but they'll come from Lord knows where.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're on mute, Pete. Pete, you're on mute.
Well spotted. Another schoolboy error. I'm acutely aware that the clock is running at 6 minutes past 2. So, Jane and Mike, I don't want to be rude to you both, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to you, Jane, first, and then to Mike, and then I'm going to ask Ashley to respond to you both. Okay, so Councillor Jane Pascoe.
Hi, thank you. My apologies for my phone going off. It always happens, doesn't it, Peter? That was really, really interesting. Thank you very much. I just wanted to cover back on to the apprenticeships. It was something from experience I did in Liskeard with the Liskeard Sixth Form College and the engineering industry in that area. And I was told by the engineers that they needed to get to them at a young age of maybe 14 to inspire them and tell them about all the different facets that there were. And I'm just wondering, how early do you try and attract these apprentices? And do you have visits to the schools and things like this to tell them about almost what you're telling us? You know, what actually is available and how it goes, because sometimes I think the school had said to me they were educationalists and they had no connection with industry. So I just rang up engineers and took them in there, and then that works. And they are taking apprentices up in my area. The other thing I really wanted to ask you, surrounded by water and marine industry, how connected is China Clay, your composites, with, you know, the minerals with the marine industry? I thought you said carbon fibre and all of that. Is it a big connection?
No.
Right, okay, no. Ashley, don't answer. Hang on a second. Jane's points are made. I'm going to ask Councillor Mike Mclennan to come forward and put his points. Fine. I'm desperate to try and stay on time today, if that's okay. So, Councillor Mike Mclennan, please.
Okay, afternoon, Ashley. My son went to Bath Uni as well. He went to the uni, so doesn't use anything he got a master's in now. But my view is I'm always interested in jobs. So when you say you've got 15, you know, or what you want to call them, apprentices, graduates, what sort of number come through each year? Is that it? 15 people?
No, not that many. No, I mean, so you know, the 8 that we've taken on this year in terms of apprentices,
yeah,
that would be a reasonably typical number today. Right. You know, I can remember the year that I joined. I remember in 1985. In my very first year with the company, I was fortunate to win an award, and I went to an awards ceremony in Junkie House, and I was there, and in my discipline, finance, I think there were 4 of us in total. The engineers took up the whole of one end of the building because they were taking on as an industry then about 40 a year. When the industry used to have its own training school, it didn't used to need Cornwall College or its predecessor. It had its own training facility. But
if I see the chairman looking at me, thanks for that. But so I'm passionate about jobs for Cornwall, but so far 10 and 2 there, the number's not equating to what I'm looking for. I expect we'll hear more this afternoon from the Chief Executive on that one. The other question I want to go is a negative. I must ask you this question. I went to see Dennis May recently, and they're concerned about their future because it's in the hands of your company with the aggregates. They're looking to move because if you want to say the relationship between the rural, which I'm in St Stephen and Branald area, is that endless complaints about lorries, and that's a negative for the rural area. There's not many of them really that concerned about him now because they haven't got jobs there. So Dennis May is saying to me, oh, I can move further out for the A30, but it all hinges on whether we get a contract that's good enough for us for our future. So that's a concern for me there on jobs and runoffs from there. I'm not saying to you disagree a contract now, Ashley, but that's another problem I have coming up in my division. Thank you.
Right, okay, so what we're going to do, Ashley, if it's okay, if you could pick up Mike's points and Jane's points, and then we'll try and squeeze your top recommendations out of you, if that's okay, please. Okay,
so if I come back to Jane's point on the apprenticeships, you're absolutely right. You know, it's no good starting your journey at the age of 17 and 18. I mean, you can, it's an option. You can just put an advert out, see what happens, and hope for the best. So what we tried to do, and we could always do more, is we know that we're only likely to attract people from the local schools. So we're probably not going to be too successful if we head off to Penzance or even Bude or Launceston. So we focus on the regional colleges, and we don't take a traditional approach of sending in the HR people. What we do is we send in the young people who've been through exactly the same process, yeah, a few years before. So if we go to a careers event in a college, probably will front up a recently qualified apprentice and a young French, lady in a different discipline to portray an image of the organisation which is diverse, which is, has got males and females. We don't have anything like enough females, but we're trying to influence at that younger age. Yeah. And this is a topic I could talk about for England, because I'm also a MAT governor. So I'm a trustee of the Lanson College Multi-Academy Trust. And we have a combination of primary schools and secondaries, and we're trying desperately to give these people opportunities. But you've absolutely got to influence further back in the food chain, as it were. Totally agree.
Please do come to Listgard if you get the chance. They'd be very grateful. Please.
Right, Ashley, so what this panel is going to do, once it's completed the session today, we're going to amalgamate all of the evidence, and there's some quite interesting work being done by Lynn Davey in terms of mapping all of the subjects that people have brought up. But would you hazard 3 or 4 interventions that you think Cornwall Council could take that would facilitate further success and help for you as an industry?
Yeah, I do that, just linking into the question that Mike asked around the aggregate side. Just for information, Jack May has a long-term contract with us already. It's not, he doesn't need a new one. He's already got one, and he's about to acquire a big slug of land off us as well. So we're well aware of Jack's aspirations. The issue we will always have in the aggregate side is the analogy of the tail wagging the dog. Okay, so our business is to supply China clay to cosmetics customers or whatever, and as a byproduct we generate materials that then can be consumed by the aggregate companies. What the aggregate companies would all love is for us to reverse that model, such that what we produced as a primary product was material for them, right? So they basically have to take what we're providing them, rather than what they would necessarily want. But that is just a course of that's because it's a byproduct of what we do. Yeah. So and we're moving 2.25 million tons of secondary aggregate out of mid Cornwall, hence some of the problems with the trucks. Yeah. And it's going to get worse in the short term because of the 391 and the A30 investment programs. Right. Great programs for Cornwall, but there's going to be some short-term pain because there's going to be a lot more trucks on the roads. Yeah. So I mean that would actually be one of my examples of where we can actually bolster the situation we've got already. We have hundreds of millions of tons of China clay waste, the Cornish Alps that was referred to earlier. The constraint with that business is that it really only reaches today a relatively local market, because the cost of logistics, as soon as you want to move it too much further, basically prohibits it against other alternatives. There is a way around it, and the way around it is to use rail and sea more, because there you can move bigger quantities. And our sites are rail connected, and we also use the Port of Foy, yeah, where we can get very big vessels in and out. And so investment and support for the logistics supply chain to move aggregate to further away markets, I think, is one area of interest. Clearly, I think lithium has got huge potential, but not only. Okay, so I've used the example of the Garden Village as something where we can recreate a community based on the land holding we've got. But if we look at things like lithium, if we look at things like large-scale pump storage hydro or geothermal energy, they all to some extent require space. And the one thing we've got aplenty is space. Yeah, one of the reasons why within our organization we've not been so badly impacted by the pandemic is because our people are spread out over relatively big areas. Yeah, so we naturally socially distance, if you like. But that links into the opportunities we have around things like lithium, around things like aggregates, because they need quite a big footprint to operate. Yeah, and clearly with something like lithium, my analogy there would be similar to the one that I use for our own business, which is the material it naturally occurs somewhere, so you can't move that. But what you can then do is you can centralize you can create a kind of a critical mass around that of expertise that allows that product then to move to further markets. You know, and lithium is oversimplified by people as well. You put lithium in batteries that are needed in electric cars, and Boris has told us today that we're going to have only electric cars from 10 years' time. Therefore, that's bound to be a success, which is probably true. But that will be a very competitive mass market. Lithium is used in lots of other applications as well, right? So think of lithium in the context of ceramics and cosmetics to us. Ceramics very traditional, cosmetics, you know, growing, developing, more sustainable. Lithium will have the same sort of characteristics. The electric vehicles is the bulk market. That's the bit that earns you the right to operate, gives you the underlying cash flow. The really clever bit is using it in other applications. And that's what draws people that are, you know, the young people that are excited about opportunities, being more socially responsible, being more sustainability minded into the future. And I think that is a really, really key benefit that Cornwall has, is that it's a nice place to live. We're generally nice people to live beside, to work beside. And that's a big attraction for young people. And if you can combine that then with something that's really got a purpose, a social conscience to it, then you're matching together lots of attributes into something that we can offer, because we've got the natural environment down here.
Okay, Ashley, for that, thank you very much indeed. From myself as chair, thank you for your time. It's been incredibly valuable, incredibly interesting. I think that we could easily spend another couple of hours and still not get everything out of you that we could do. From the panel, obviously, the panel's thanks for how valuable time is to people, and from Cornwall Council, thank you as well. It's been very kind of you to attend and attend as a witness and give us your evidence. So thank you very much indeed.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next expert witness is Kate Connelly, the Chief Executive of Cornwall Council. So Kate, very warm welcome to our meeting.
Thank you.
It's a very slightly different way. I want to say slightly different, it's hardly any different at all, but we're giving our witnesses sort of 12 to 15 minutes. Don't feel you have to take it all, although I'm sure you probably would have planned what you're going to say very carefully. You normally do. And then we'll, one by one with the panel, have an informal chat with you and hopefully try and stay on time as we go through that. But before you speak, just out of interest, already a couple of times in our inquiry panels, the BBC programme with Simon Reeve has come up, and Simon Reeve's interpretation of Cornwall and some of the intrinsic problems to the aspirations of youngsters to get on ahead and actually have valuable employment, and some of the issues that Simon has brought forward have been very interesting to me, and something that I think that it's really worthy of this panel to consider responding to. And I just wonder if in your piece to us you might give some sort of briefing to us on whether you believe Cornwall Council believes a response is appropriate to those BBC programmes, and if there is any link within that to the Cornwall We Want or the Council We Want programme, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be a witness to this inquiry. I wouldn't say an expert witness, and it's come about because I have had the opportunity over the summer of leading at a national level a task and finish group reporting into an economic recovery group focusing in on the rural economies. And I wanted to make sure, when I saw that the Economic Growth and Development Overview and Scrutiny Committee had identified this topic, that you were connected to some of that work. So I think my first observations that I want to make is that this is a huge, wide-ranging topic, and I'm not entirely certain as yet around kind of what are some of your specific areas that you're wanting to explore through this, whether you're looking at differences within Cornwall, which of course the evidence pack looking at the differences between the different lag areas started to point to, or whether you're examining whether kind of economic policy for the UK sufficiently takes account of rural and coastal issues in the context of kind of UK industrial policy, or whether you're looking at kind of underlying performance of the Cornish economy, or whether you're picking up on elements of COVID. So I'll start with some general comments, and then we can see kind of where some of that takes. But one of the reasons why I wanted to bring to your attention the work that we've been doing at a national level is that I think, in respect of Cornwall Council has been seeking to try and make sure that it is a strong voice for rural economies within the context of the UK industrial policy. And therefore, I hope very much that this inquiry will think about how does it augment and strengthen that approach that the council's been taking in trying to stand up for Cornwall to make sure that industrial policy reflects rural areas. And some examples of how that's being done is that the leader of the council is the County Council Network's Rural Affairs leading spokesperson. We've established Britain's Leading Edge, which is the 12 upper tier local authorities bringing together policy platforms around the contribution areas such as Cornwall make, areas without a city, in terms of the UK. And we've given evidence at a national level through to the Treasury Select Committee, through to other government committees on actually the opportunities, the economic opportunities that places such as Cornwall face. Because hitherto, over the last sort of 20 odd years, industrial policy within the UK has predominantly been that directed to agglomeration through cities and city-based productivity measures. And I think that what Britain's Leading Edge is seeking to do is to say this is not a debate of cities versus rural areas. This needs to be a debate of how do we actually kind of also create the opportunities in rural areas, and particularly in the areas of decarbonising our economy. Rural areas are the places that are best placed to be able to support the decarbonising of the UK's economy in particular. So how it becomes an and agenda rather than saying, oh, well, you don't care about rural areas, it's just about cities. It's about saying, well, actually, now you need to be paying attention in both places. So Britain's Leading Edge is aiming to create the equivalent of the Centre for Cities, which has been a very powerful, and the Core Cities Group been a very powerful lobbying group arguing for where cities are, to have the same level of debate and arguments being made for rural areas. And to that extent, Cornwall Council is funding a PhD student through Exeter University. We've got a session looking at rural development, bringing together academics next week at national level to start to try and share some of these examples and bring this to life. And as somebody studying geography in the kind of 1980s, when it was cities all talking about, you know, inner city decay and decline and everyone leaving cities, I think you can see the power of having really strong advocacy and where cities now are at, and how the opportunity exists through something equivalent for rural places. So Britain's Leading Edge. It's also worthwhile, I think, noting the ambition that was there in the Creative Manifesto, which Cabinet signed off earlier this month. It talks about Cornwall being the leading rural creative economy, and across the evidence base as a whole, areas for growth within rural economies are seen as being particularly significant opportunities in the creative industries, and that's linking into some of maximising on the strategic investments that have been made over the years with Falmouth University. So that plays into that evidence, but is also a positioning piece. I have been doing the piece of work which I'll speak about in a moment on rural economies over the summer, and we of course have got the opportunity with having the Secretary of State for Environment as a Cornish MP, and that opportunity that comes through that close working relationship that we have with Secretary of State Eustace, I think, to be really showing what Cornwall has to offer in respect to this agenda. And finally, that we are positioning ourselves in Cornwall in our discussions with government at the moment as being the rural equivalent of Greater Manchester when it comes to devolution. So Greater Manchester devolution model has set the template largely for how urban areas are coming together with combined authorities, and government have recognised that Cornwall kind of follows on behind that in terms of actually setting a template for rural areas. So I just wanted to make that point, and as I do, there's a knock at my door and my dogs are going slightly mad in the background, so please accept my apologies for that. Turning then to the kind of the national context for the piece of work that I've been doing. Excuse me one moment, if you don't mind.
No, that's fine, Kate. I too have a dog that kicks off at the merest hair trigger event. Just to the panel, what Kate's been talking about, national works and the work of this panel augmenting and strengthening previous national work of the council. I think, to be honest, we've been on a much more parochial journey, because we've been looking at stuff, activities, industries, and the economy of our own duchy, haven't we? I don't think, it doesn't feel like we've been doing much on a national level, if I'm honest, but we'll come back to that later. Kate, the floor is yours. I forgive you for your dog, because I've got one that sounds about the same size.
Honestly, 2 Jack Russells. They're lovely to me, but hateful to visitors. Anyway, there we are. And it was Cornwall Council at the door as well. I just wanted to, I hope that that's helpful just in giving some of that context. And I think my next point that I wanted to make was actually about the work that I've been involved in at a rural level, and why actually I think that this is significant and something also to build on. So the first thing I wanted to draw attention to the committee is that the House of Lords, I think, produced a very thoughtful and comprehensive report that was published in April of last year. They had a rural economy committee that produced a report calling for a rural strategy for the rural economy, and the government responded in October of 2019 to that House of Lords report, and whilst welcoming lots of the observations that were made, were not convinced that there was a need actually for a particular rural strategy, and indeed were concerned that by picking up specific issues of rural, actually do you start to put them in a kind of a special category and separate them from wider industrial policy. Of course, I understand that argument. Some of the issues that rural economies face are distinct from urban areas, particularly around connectivity, whether that's about transport connectivity, whether that's about digital connectivity. Also, some of the nature and structure of the economic enterprises vary, and these things will be known. But at that time, the government didn't feel that there was a need. So I think that fast forward, if you like, through into the outcome, you know, in the summer, where we're starting to think about economic recovery from COVID, actually at a national level, the government asked that there was a specific piece of work that was done, the economic recovery, to look at the specific issues that rural areas face. So that's a bit of a shift. And actually, on the back of having done some of that work, and I have shared across the report for your inquiry to consider, that Lord Gardner, who is the minister within DEFRA, has identified that he will work with us in terms of a ministerial level in kind of picking up and running with some of the recommendations that were identified. Now, this was about some very short-term measures that the government could be doing specifically to be helping the rural and coastal visitor economies immediately post the cessation of lockdown. And so they were very practical things around how to get through the winter period and avoid the 3-winter scenario. And you know, the government since, and we're now in this current second lockdown, we've seen some of those recommendations being picked up, for example, the furlough scheme kind of continuing. But I suppose the point of bringing it to your attention is recognising that there was a shift from where government had been to say we don't need to do something about rural, into actually recognising that there were some specific issues, and actually Cornwall have been involved in providing some leadership in that regard. So I'm very happy to speak kind of further around that, or answer any questions that you might have in respect of that. We had a working group that drew evidence from across the country, particularly been working across with places like Cumbria. We share quite a lot of similarities with Cumbria in terms of the structure of our economy, settlement patterns. We had DEFRA officials, DCMS officials working with us, LEP chief executives, so that it was a cross-sector group of local authorities, LEPs and government officials. So what about Cornwall kind of at the moment, and some of the things that are really on our mind? As we look at the economy right now, we know from headline stats that we are as a country and as a place in an economic downturn. People on universal credit has gone up by 800% from September 19 to September 2020. We're seeing some big increases in places such as Mevagissey, around Newquay, St Ives. Those that are claimants, because of course universal credit isn't just those people that are unemployed, because it covers other benefits now, but the claimant count now is 5.4% of the population within Cornwall, whereas this time last year it was 3.2%. And we've got around 85,000 people subject to furlough. So, significant risk that is sitting there in terms of unemployment. And one of the things that I was interested in too was looking in your figures that you've seen as an inquiry about actually in that evidence pack that came out with this invitation, was from the ONS report looking at coastal areas, that within Cornwall, just within some of those towns that were listed in coastal towns, is that there's quite a mismatch between areas that are still experiencing kind of population growth and those areas that are seeing and then what's happening within employment growth, with I think the biggest mismatch being St Austell, where there's 10% employment growth but minus 19% unemployment levels. Minus 19% employment growth, and I've already reflected that actually we're seeing kind of UC count going up kind of quite a lot in that area. So when we look and start to drill into those figures within Cornwall, we can see what's happening in terms of claimant count. We can also see what's happening in terms of kind of population growth within areas, and we can see also what's happening with employment levels. And some areas we've got a better balance than others. So the issues in Falmouth, for example, will be different, where the population has grown by 8%, but employment has grown by 18%. That's likely to lead to house price pressures, because actually you've got more jobs kind of being created than actually kind of people being there. So that's likely to have more inflationary pressures, where you might see somewhere like St Austell or Bude or Penzance that we're seeing a different kind of dynamic that is in place. So in a way that the House of Lords was arguing for something that was a place-based rural strategy for the UK, I think that there's an interesting challenge for us within Cornwall about actually, are we noticing some of these trends that are happening kind of within our communities about population growth, employment growth? To what extent is there a match? And then when we've got areas where there's bigger mismatches, about what we're then seeking to try and do with it. Because part of some of my experience of how sometimes we have to respond to either national policy or indeed to how we do things locally is that sometimes we'll go after where the opportunity presents itself, where the project proposer is, where the funding stream is, that might or might not always be based on where some of that evidence points us and directs us to. So an example of that at a national level, perhaps, and I know that we've got Councillor Pascoe here, you know, and of course yourself, Peter from Bude, is, you know, where our towns fund, which is set nationally for us, might not be if we were making a set of choices ourselves locally, where you would choose to be investing in those areas. So I think there's a challenge for us around those relationships between how we use data and evidence for some of our commissioning based decisions that we make. I think as well, one of the things that I'd also kind of reflect on, that the Oxford Economics were commissioned through Southwest Councils, and again, I don't know if your inquiry has seen their report, to do a economic analysis immediately kind of post across the Southwest, but then for each local authority area on the nature of local economies in the Southwest. So we received a report for Cornwall, and that they have identified what they refer to as a coronavirus vulnerability index, and that they've taken 3 themes against which that they assess areas vulnerability to being affected by the pandemic. The first is around kind of economic diversity. The second is around business structure, and the third is around digital connectivity. And through having established policies, 100 is seen as being kind of the average within the UK. Now, those with the lowest vulnerability in the country, probably you might be able to guess, they were Cambridge, they were Reading, they were the City of London. But within the Southwest, there were some areas that were seen as being relatively less vulnerable. Exeter was ranked as the 17th least vulnerable place in the country. Gloucester 28th, Bristol 33rd. Cornwall was ranked at 115 in the top 25%. But interestingly, and why I wanted just to also kind of bring this to your attention, is that Mid Devon was ranked as 149, West Devon at 150, North Devon at 137. So again, places that don't have large towns, large settlements, will be predominantly having industrial sectors that are more akin to more kind of rural areas. So there is a greater vulnerability that comes through the nature of rural places to COVID that is coming through from this analysis that Oxford Economics has done. And what it particularly picks out is that Cornwall's economy is it scores lower in some of the in those parts where it looks at the economic diversity because predominance within our economy of particular sectors. So I think that leads me as a good segue into just some comments about Simon Reeve's programme and some of the messages that were contained within that. So obviously Cornwall Live is the most authoritative source of all fact that happens within Cornwall. But one of the things that I think is always really interesting within Cornwall Live is to look at the comments that sit underneath different articles. And actually, I thought what for me struck very hard and forcibly, looking at some of the comments that were made in response to the first of the programmes that came out, was how it resonated with the people of Cornwall, that actually that the comments that were being made welcomed the programme as reflecting a Cornwall that they recognised, rather than sometimes some of the other elements that can be projected around Cornwall. And it chimes with some of the evidence that we heard through the listening exercise that we've done over the summer in the Cornwall We Want, that has formed the evidence base, along with all of the stats and things for starting to think about the priorities in the Cornwall plan. So about people wanting to see, all year round jobs and careers, rather than just the kind of the moving from hand to kind of mouth existence. But also, I think some of the opportunities that exist within Cornwall, that were also being spoken about, and I know you've just had evidence from Ashley in terms of the importance of the minerals industry kind of within Cornwall that was showcased in programme 1. So I think that Simon Reeve reflected a view of Cornwall that chimed with actually some of the messages and the things that we were hearing through the listening exercise. And actually, in terms of some of the priority areas that are identified in the transitions that are set out as being the things that we should aim for, seek to try and, one, to achieve the opportunities that we have around, being the greenest place within Cornwall, around that being a USP, something that's really important to us, around no child growing up breathing dirty air, but also speaking to some of the social issues that we still face around, making sure that people aren't being reliant on food banks, making sure that people aren't lonely, and that we build on those strong senses of community. So they're ambitious goals, but I think that they speak to some of the things that were there within the programme. And I suppose just tying that then back to what I think are some of Cornwall's strengths, and about where this inquiry could be going if you're looking at issues within Cornwall rather than issues that are about the role of rural economies within the UK PLC, is that I think that there is an opportunity as we reset the localism strategy to be thinking more about what town and parish councils as economic and community enablers can be doing. That was specifically picked up within the House of Lords report as well, encouraging them to use their discretionary powers to particularly promote local growth. They are unencumbered currently by a cap. So actually, what's the opportunities that come from that in terms of helping to get that better mix, and how do we use some of our collective experience that comes from the LEADER programme and LAG and our different place shaping initiatives to really kind of commit to starting to make some of this information available, so that we are building that capacity at a local level. I think that there's also some other bits of our policy that we might need to consider. So at the moment we have, for COVID purposes, been suspending some of our policies that link people around how we allocate housing. So we have suspended some elements that require that really strong part of local connection. And I've been asking for some of the evidence around, well, what's been some of the consequences of that? And I know that that's going to be looked at and considered, but also been hearing kind of examples where it was a woman who born in Cornwall, but had secured a job working in the NHS in Bodmin, from a different part of Cornwall, from the west, I believe. But how local connection was operating meant that she was cut out of being able to access some of the affordable housing in Bodmin because she wasn't seen to be local. And I'm not sure that that's actually what the spirit or the intention is of actually how, as a council, we want that piece of local connection to work a really important job, but because of how some of those parts around what gets determined as local have meant for her some of those opportunities were more challenging. And we know at the heart that actually, in terms of for rural economies, that there is a particular issue in terms of housing affordability as being some of the bigger challenges. We've also, of course, got the importance of the local bus fares pilot and the commitment that was made around that. And I think that's really important that we get some progress in place around that, because that's another barrier that we know that people in rural areas face. And I suppose I also wanted just to make a comment too that one of the stories in the first Simon Reeves programme, it was the taco boys, wasn't it, that were kind of saying, oh well, we're off to Exeter. Yeah. Actually, we're seeing some really great innovations, and one of Cornwall's real great strengths is about the number of small, well, particularly micro enterprises, about how do we, particularly for young people at the moment that have been some of the most excluded from the marketplace, really get to know who some of those are and really kind of connect them in to help them really think about how they stay within Cornwall and how they grow some of their businesses. So there was a very interesting piece that the Resolution Foundation had in the FT earlier this month on the 6th of November, who would really not in Cornwall, but they were finding their equivalents of the taco boys in different parts of the country, and how young people in particular during this time are really coming up with some very, very kind of creative, very small scale enterprises. I'm sure, I know that they'll be here within Cornwall, but do we know them, and how do we really kind of put some of our business support kind of around them to help them to stay? I think that there's a real opportunity there working across with our universities. And my very last comment, Chairman, is that there is a piece of research that Deutsche Bank have just put out, and it's about where kind of COVID sits as an opportunity or a threat. So at the moment, my general view is that places like Cornwall could end up with changes in ways of work benefit, because actually people know that they can work anywhere and they don't need to sit for hours commuting into a big city centre. But Deutsche Bank are leading a debate that says, well, actually, those staff that are now choosing to work from home, should they now be paying a tax to do that? Because actually that there's a benefit, that there's less investment going into high streets, other businesses are suffering because people are going to their local fridge rather than to their local takeaway. They make the case that actually a 5% tax for every day chosen to work at home could then enable some of that to be redirected to staff that can't work from home and some of the lower paid workers within a community. But I think we're in this structural change moment, and there's certainly opportunity for Cornwall, but there's also some other things that are kind of going on that could kind of change this. And I suppose my last message is around, we're unlikely to go back to what we've had before. How do we use this moment to kind of really position kind of Cornwall to build the right relationships, to start to find where those new industries are coming and get behind and back those? I'll stop there.
Kate, thank you. I wouldn't want to be the government that brings forward this 5% working from home tax, because I can't see it be universally popular.
I'd support it. I'd support it happily.
Oh, okay. Well, obviously we're all going to have to
deal with 6 hours on Teams every day.
Okay. Right, Kate, thank you very much indeed. That's been really valuable, really very, very interesting. Obviously, we've got 10 minutes left for interaction with you now. So rather than us each have an individual conversation with you, which we have been doing with other witnesses, I think what I want to do is rattle through all of the councillors, one after the other, and then you can respond en bloc if that's okay. But the very few things that I wanted to pick up with you was I would absolutely welcome Cornwall Council inviting Simon Reeve forward, and Tim Smith to a certain degree, because he made it sound so simple in terms of solving the housing issues that we have here in Cornwall, that I would like to invite him to come forward and make some suggestions and actually seriously consider those, because sometimes somebody with a completely different background might have some really good ideas, and I think it'd be worth listening to, and it would demonstrate that we, as a caring council, have taken note of what Simon brought forward. And I think what he brought forward did touch an awful lot of people. It touched me. Absolutely, I could see stuff there that I identify with in my community. You talked a little bit about public transport. I am beginning to wonder whether we're missing a trick here with rural public transport. Public transport seems to work well between centres of population. What it doesn't serve very well is rural, properly rural areas. And I've had on my mind for a long time that we should be really thinking hard about if this makes sense, a mass availability of public transport that is not necessarily linear. That is a bus that goes or a train that goes from A to B, but it's an on-demand system. And I think car clubs and access to relatively small vehicles and methods of transport could be the key to unlocking that. We had a really interesting conversation with Lord Taylor about with many things, but one of the things which you happened across was levelling up. And if you want to get levelling up right, you can't take easy wins. You've got to make sure you make you make that levelling up agenda available to all of the population, and that's where it has its biggest benefits. And the final thing I just wanted to say was you opened up by saying you hoped that the work of this panel would augment and strengthen some of the previous work of the council on a national basis. We haven't really been looking at national stuff. I'm sure that probably some of the evidence and some of the conclusions we come to could well support that, but we've been looking much more on a parochial level of actually what is happening within Cornwall and what the council could do to facilitate those things developing and supporting our economy going forward. Right, so let's go to Mike Mclennan first. Councillor Mike Mclennan.
Good afternoon, Kate. Or is it still good morning or good afternoon? Good afternoon. Just quickly, I disagree with the chairman about inviting Simon Reeve down because it was a TV programme and it was put together. And most of the stuff that you all lived in Cornwall longer than me, you probably knew anyway. So I disagree with the chairman there. A Dala bus service was available in the home counties around London many years ago. And I suppose it could work. It was so old-fashioned then because it was all done manually. The things you mentioned, Kate, that concern me, and I think they probably concern you. We had the home choice presentation on our committee yesterday. I think it was yesterday, Jim, was it? Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah. And then we discussed it at the Conservative group meeting later on. And as you know, I sit on Cornwall Housing. I think home choice needs to have a dagger taken to it. I think it needs to be ripped apart. I know the leader wants to talk to me about it. Yesterday, it was all nice cosmetic presentation, but it's not happening. We've got so many problems that we have understanding home choice. And I've asked simply at board meetings, can you come along and just say, oh, we've got 10,000 cases this month. Next month it's 9,000. So please tell me where those 1,000 went to. And I've sat on the crucial people with serious problems, normally about 13 of them. At the end of the morning, and that's with the NHS staff there, they can't place the people. So we have those meetings, and what happens next? So I just feel, you know, I come from a private background. It's not how I would work. And I think there's something missing there, definitely on home choice, we've got a problem. With regard to business, I'm not certain if the officers who do so much work looking at recovery for Cornwall are business minded. Is that their background? You know, I think we need to have people who've got that real expertise in business. And I'm not sometimes certain about the presentations we heard from the different organisations, whether they really understand business. It's not the most difficult thing in the world to go and get advice yourself about setting up HMRC accounts and this, that and the other. As long as you know your marketplace and you're enthusiastic, you've got the right product, you've got half a chance. That's basically it, as far as I'm concerned. Micro businesses, we've got to be careful because, as I said so many times, you can't have, I wouldn't be a good client, 10 hairdressers in St Stephen's all working from home because the clientele's not there. So we've got to be careful how we do that. Fair play, I don't think fair play will ever happen in my lifetime because it hasn't happened in the past. And not everybody can have your position, Kate. Not everybody can have the chap before us because he said, oh, we're coming in and it's jobs the boys are gone, but we're bringing people forward. But it was sadly not that many over the years. So there's still my huge concerns about how we're tackling jobs in Cornwall and how we're going to find them. I haven't been convinced on any presentations yet from your staff on that one. A couple more points. I asked Phil Mason this the other day. If COVID hadn't happened, would you be looking at your business model at Cornwall Council? Has it made you look at your business model because it's COVID, or were you going to do that anyway? And lastly, working from home, many businesses, I think about 60% was the last figures I heard nationally, are not that keen on people working from home. And I think I'm a bit of a tyrant, really, because I want to know what people are doing if I was their boss. And it's all very well. My son works from home. He is a consultant from London. He had to move back here. And they can see when he does his work, his hierarchy can look in and see, you know, he's doing a presentation for Kettering Hospital at the moment, but they can see what he's doing. And I think the other thing is, you don't really know what I do, or the other guys or councillors on this around this concept today, this meeting. So I don't want to either, Mike. Sorry?
I don't want to either, thanks.
No, let me finish on that point though. But we do an enormous amount that must take some weight off officers and staff that no one really knows about. And I think that needs a drawing up somewhere. So that's my points, Kate. I could go on, but.
Right. Thanks, Mike. I can see that Liz Wilkin has joined us, is due to start at 3. Liz, we're going to be running about 10 minutes late by the time Kate has answered our questions. She's going to have a very long list by the time we get to the end of them. So are you okay with that, Liz?
Anyway, hello. I'm here and I'm enjoying listening. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. So, Kate, if you don't mind making a very long list in that case, we're going to go to Councillor Jane Pascoe, please.
Thank you. Mine's not going to be as long as Mike's by any stretch of imagination. I just wanted to bring it back to what we've sort of been looking at, and that is the interaction between what goes on in the hinterland and around the towns, and how it impacts on the towns as well. And there are various areas, aren't there? I mean, you take Mevagissey and places and Mclennan and so on, it's all about fishing industry. You take my area, it's all about agriculture. And how displacing an industry from a rural hinterland like South East Cornwall is proving very difficult, because each farmer has 6 providers or suppliers of some description. The reason we've got 3 high street banks still in Liskeard at the moment, plus a Santander actually, and all the professional people, is because of what goes on in the rural economy around it, and that is their centre of commerce. In fact, we used to be proud to say we were the centre of commerce for South East Cornwall. It's getting very difficult there now, and it's struggling. And you talked about levelling up, and I know that Peter's going to agree from his limb, but we're out on a limb in South East Cornwall. Even the bus fare pilots, it won't take people over the bridge to our only hospital. So we're at a total disadvantage there. I think that's quite unfair. The tolls are going to go up on the bridge. So there's all those sort of things stacked up against South East Cornwall. The Clay Country, we had a witness here, I don't know, was it Monday? And they've had thousands of square meters of workspace provided in their area. We've actually in 20 years had nothing. We've now got a project going on in the cattle market, but it's not actually the units we need. We're hemorrhaging businesses across the water. So I think if we're talking about levelling up an investment, yes, that rural area is being left out, but it can be very important. We're a strategic place on the A38 that I think that we probably need more help. You also mentioned about the town and parish councils. Yesterday in a meeting, it was thrown out about, it was actually about car parking, and I'm not even going to go into that. Oh, well, a town and parish town council can pay for another day. Actually, you know, they don't have that much spare money, and the town is dying on its feet. So they're doing the best they can in other ways to support the town. So I think there's a limit to what these town and parish councils can do, and knowing that they are all volunteers in those little parish councils. So I'm not quite sure where everybody's thinking on that. So that was one thing that makes life more difficult out in the rural areas. And the other thing is, well, one question, and it came from actually Ashley, the last speaker, or last witness. How do we keep talented young people in Cornwall, the ones that are qualified? How are we going to do this? Because there is not a lot here for them. I mean, he was talking about a lot of opportunities. I'm sure that the panel will agree, but I still don't know how we can get, there must be something we can do to attract more of them to get their qualifications and come back and stay. So I think that's probably me done, Peter, if that's okay. I know you're short of time. Thanks, Kate.
Short of time, we're over time. No, but Jane, thank you. The great points. Councillor Jim Mckenna, please.
Peter, thank you. Kate, good afternoon. Are you able to move slightly to your left, Kate, so I can see Penzance on the map?
I think you know what it looks like, Jim. I
do. It's a fabulous place. I'm looking out the window. The sky's blue. I certainly admire Jane's passion, as we heard yesterday, but Penzance is rather more isolated in terms of employment prospects than Liscard, which literally can just shoot through the on the train or the toll. So it's a balance, I think, and I think the purpose of this exercise is to look pan-Cornwall as well. So I would certainly agree with the chairman's suggestion also around Simon Reeve. We could get him in at some point. I think that would be fantastic, because those are two of the best programmes I've seen for a long time on Cornwall. He goes to places that other people don't, and he's balanced as opposed to sort of myopic, or he hasn't made his mind up before he goes. So I thought they were fabulous. Two things really. Decarbonising the economy and rural areas, Kate, I was struck by that. I'd be really interested in knowing what is meant. Obviously, we've got the Forest for Cornwall programme and so forth, but I guess the employment opportunities in decarbonisation are going to increase. And so it would be useful, it would be really good actually to have conversations outside of this about how that could benefit some of the more isolated places. I mean, you've got members representing some of those here. But Bude, for example, the far west, where we hardly have any trees. So I'd be really interested in that being followed up. And my second thing really was town and parish councils. I would agree with you, actually. I think there are opportunities for some of the larger towns initially, and potentially now being rolled out to more places, actually almost acting as exemplars in that regard and taking some of the strain. And I wonder whether or not the devolution programme could be linked to some of that, particularly in terms of employment creation. And I'm thinking possibly about space, buildings, those sorts of things, rather than cash. So very interested in talking to somebody about that, again, outside of this, to see whether we could get Bude, Penzance, Liscard, whatever, working with our town councils to say, OK, there are some opportunities here for you to actually physically make a difference in terms of employment, rather than simply just giving grants out and that sort of thing. So be interested in your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Great. Would you, happy Chairman, if I have a go at quickly, briefly responding?
Yes, please do, Kate. I think Liz is happy to wait for 10 minutes. So that's good.
Great. So turning to your points first, Chairman. I mean, I think in terms of the bus fares pilot and how we do this, key to this is actually driving volume and actually getting people out of their cars and onto buses. So we are completely up for thinking about how can we make that happen. So at the moment we're approaching it through low fares. We've been seeking to try and get a smarter, more integrated offer, but there might be other things that the council might need to consider, that as well as making public transport attractive, is that you might have to make cars less attractive. And I think that this is going to be this balance of carrot and stick about where that ends up sitting and falling. So, in reality, what we have from government is £23 million to pump prime to get a mass shift so that this stacks up economically. And how we do that, a balance of carrot and stick, we'd really welcome members' thoughts around, because I don't think it will happen just solely through carrot, because I just don't think we're going to make enough big shift. I think what's interesting is that more young people are not choosing to actually take their driving test in the same way nationally. You know, we might be coming to almost some of the last generations of people kind of seeing cars in this way, but we're in this space at the moment that we want to prompt that. So really open to ideas. Levelling up and the levelling up agenda is important. Of course it is. It's important to Cornwall and us influencing kind of the government's view of what do they mean by levelling up and what's happening next to the Shared Prosperity Fund. But within how we've used the European funds locally through the LEADER programme, we've had different ways within which that we've been then working at a local level. And I think we, as a place, as we think about the Cornwall plan, need to understand what we mean by levelling up within Cornwall as well. So any recommendations that come out from this, I think, will be welcome. Simon Reeve, we, through the comms team, are already starting to get in contact across with the production team, just to be responding actually to some of the things that we've been doing within Cornwall to open that dialogue up. So you know, that is in hand. Mike on home choice and housing allocations. We know at the moment from COVID that we've had a doubling of the number of homelessness presentations. We've got to have an effective way of matching people in housing need to available property. It doesn't always work as well as that we would like, whether that's the example that I gave or others that sometimes see some of those people that are the most vulnerable being locked out of some of the different options, and it's absolutely up there on the to-do list to sort. Are we business minded? Well, you know, I can't change Cornwall Council officers from being really good Cornwall Council officers. That's what you employ us to be. What I want is that sometimes that Cornwall Council knows its limitations, that actually we're sometimes at our best when we are a convener. We bring the right people together rather than to answer the questions, always rather than trying to answer the questions ourselves. So our relationships across with the business community, building our local place boards, such as we've done in Penzance, to bring people together that can help share that expertise, I think is where we need to be, rather than us always trying to have the answers ourselves. In terms of the kind of, if COVID hadn't have happened, would we have changed our business model? Absolutely, yes, we would. Would we have done it as quickly? No, we wouldn't. Can we sustain this level of rate of change? Yes, we can, and we must. Whether that's about climate change, whether that's about the economy, or whether it's actually about just a better way of sometimes that we're working with local businesses, local communities. I think we've learned a lot about ourselves, and I'm keen that we keep that going. Jane, I think that Liskeard and South East Cornwall has got an awful lot going for it, and whilst I hear some of the challenges around the bridge and those other issues, I also see that some of the wage levels are highest in South East Cornwall, part because of some of that Plymouth effect, and we need to kind of think about, you know, those relationships across the peninsula where that makes sense to do that. I think the local leadership piece that we started to see through some of the work that with the charrette that's then led to what we're doing with the cattle market. I think we need more of that, not kind of less of that, and Cornwall Council coming up with the options. I think we've got to stay in that space of working some of that through. And I suppose we had full council with the first wave of the community governance review changes being made. I think that was an important start, but I am interested about, you know, places such as Falmouth and such as Penzance are taking on and doing more economic development at a local level, and with Cornwall Council, with our polycentric settlement pattern, we can't do it all ourselves. We are going to have to build those more local partnerships to help to do some of that economic development. So I welcome any observations that this panel makes in that regard. How do we keep talented young people in Cornwall? Well, I think we are, and I think that part of we actually need to sometimes push back with a narrative that says that people can't, there's no jobs in Cornwall and young people are leaving. Actually, we know that through the study that was done on the ERDF funds that came to Economic Growth Overview and Scrutiny Committee in January, actually we've been really good at starting to keep more young people within Cornwall than compared to many other areas, and we need to showcase those stories, put people in contact, and I think have some explicit explicit ways within which that we showcase their work. We've got that a bit with Launchpad, but that's in a certain part of niches within the employment sector. I think we need to kind of gather some of those stories and start telling a new narrative as well. So I know I've got a 26-year-old and a 21-year-old. They didn't grow up in Cornwall, but they both want to make their lives in Cornwall because actually they can see they can get on the housing market and different things that they couldn't do in the southeast. So, you know, there are lots of advantages that we have that maybe actually we need to talk those up as well as some of the challenges. That's a personal view there. Jim, decarbonising the economy in rural areas, I think we've got lots of opportunity in this regard. The climate change DPD starting to kind of set out our expectations about how we might use land differently, how we're doing some of that a bit in our farms estate, but also looking at things like, you know, Connor Bridge in terms of that landfill site, what more we could be doing with that in terms of turning that into useful land. And I'm interested in the extent to which actually in the way that we've been thinking about our investment programme as it relates to building the homes that people need and getting a return, about what the opportunities are for an investment fund that is around in some of those decarbonised industries. And I think we've got some thinking and some work going on around that. And finally, this working from home piece, nationally and internationally, we're all now trying to work out about how do we measure productivity in this way, in this new way. But my own personal experience is that actually I think that there are all sorts of productivity gains that we've been getting. So the ability to reach people, to bring people together for conversations such as this, to get experts to come and work with Cornwall, sometimes working in a digital platform helps our productivity more than other ways around. But we're in this change point and we're still learning. I think I've covered most of the points there, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you, panel, for your questions. I was always getting quite excited as chairman, thinking I'm going to use my chairman's prerogative to come back to you on loads of these points, but I got way too many, and we've run out of time as it is, Kate. The only thing that I do want to say is that I'd really encourage thought from your end on encouraging progressive town and parish councils, because I really do think there's an opportunity to lift some of the weight from Cornwall Council. And I believe that certainly up here in Bude, I mean, I sit on my town council. I think Jim does on Penzance as well. And I think there are opportunities, and the councils really do want to be involved in their own local areas and taking responsibility. So devolution down towards those levels is really important and something I think we should accelerate if we possibly can. But anyway, Kate, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We do
and apologies for running over, Chairman.
No, that's all right. It's a delight.
Thanks.
We appreciate your time. We know how valuable it is. And thank you from the panel.
Thank you. Good
Peter,
luck.
Virtual round of applause.
Peter, I'm not a town councillor, but thank you for the offer.
Yeah, I'm a parish councillor.
Chair of the Penzance Place Shaping Board, though.
Indeed, yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, thank you, Kate. So, Liz Wilkins, you're our next expert witness. Liz, you joined us earlier. Hopefully you can turn your camera on and be with us. So, obviously, you saw Kate Connelly with us just a few moments ago.
Yep.
Who's the Chief Executive of Cornwall Council, how this has been running, and sorry to keep you waiting, sorry to go over time on this, but we invite you to sort of have 10, 12, 15 minutes, whatever you think appropriate, just to give your reflection on how you feel the vitality of the rural and coastal areas in Cornwall is, and then we'll have a conversation with you, probably one by one next time around, if that's okay with the panel. Liz, I must thank you because you did a session probably about 3 months ago, which I attended, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating on some of the aspects of encouraging very localised parish halls and town halls and different ways in which they can work to actually generate funds and generate economy and actually even jobs into extremely rural areas. But anyway, the floor is yours. Fire away and we'll listen with intent.
Thank you, Peter. And you might hear a bit of what you've already heard before, but that's my job, really. Hi, I'm Liz Wilkin. I live in Lamorna, so even further west than Jim, and I'm a Rural Community Advisor for Cornwall Rural Community Charity. I'm also lucky enough to have had a Winston Churchill Fellowship, which allowed me to travel, amongst other places, to Denmark to look at rural communities over there. So I suspect you've had a lot of very erudite, overarching experts. Mine's going to be very specific, small things. But to me, if you can make a happy community, rural community, you can make a successful one and a fun one. And that, in turn, I think does keep young people here. I've got 20-year-olds. And I think in a lot of ways, small rural communities are becoming quite stagnant and a little bit dull. And I think if we can make them more interesting and more fun, then that helps keep our young people here. Living in a small rural community is quite hard work. To me, there are three types of villages. I'm going to talk about the local ones because those are the ones I know. You get places like St Buryan, which has shops, post office, school, new housing being built. That's one type to me. Second, you get places like Mousehole, which absolutely decimated by second homes, and that then creates a dead community a lot of the year. So that to me is a dying community. And then you get ones like Lamorna, very aging population, high house prices now, and again, that's not much fun. It's hard work getting anything going in small rural communities, and it doesn't feel like there is much joined up thinking between a village and a parish council even, let alone a town council or a county council. It feels if you want to get something going in a small rural community, you've just got to do it yourself, and then you end up with 6 people in every community just wearing themselves out, and then they can't be bothered. So I think our small rural communities are on quite a knife edge, and we really need to think about them because they're so important. They're so much part of what people think of Cornwall, and it's obviously where people live. So I just want to talk about a few things. I want to talk about my village halls briefly, and also about communities working together. That's something I saw in Denmark. Communities are a bit like football teams. You really don't like the next door village. You really don't like the next door town. And we've got to stop that. We've got to start working together, I think. And I don't know if County Council can help with that in any way. And I also want to talk about using our outdoor space as a county in a cleverer way. Am I able to share a screen?
Yes, you are.
Sorry, Liz. Yes, you're very welcome to.
I don't know how to do that. I've got it all set up, but I don't know how to actually show it on my screen. Does that work? Can you see something different now?
Not yet. Sometimes it takes a moment.
Do you as chair have to let me in?
No, Liz, it's David here. Hi, how are you?
Hey, David, fine, thanks.
So if you go up to the top of your screen, certainly the way I look at it on my Microsoft Teams, at the top, you've got a screen with an arrow pointing up to it.
Yeah, got it.
If you click on that.
Yeah.
And then it will bring up a picture of all your screens that you've got open on your computer. Select. There you go.
There we go. Good.
Very quick,
okay. So I just want to talk about some things I saw in Denmark, because Denmark just did things extremely well. This was a community hall that they had put self-catering units, very basic self-catering units on the side. At the minute, our community buildings are often run by elderly people, older people, who retired 50 or 60 on good pensions. Those days are over. I'm really concerned who's going to run our community buildings in the future. And if we can commercialise them in some way, that, to me, secures their future. At the minute, I'm really worried about who's going to run our community buildings from now on. So that was a cafe. They paid a manager to take the cafe over. He then runs the whole place. It's incredibly successful. And the woman who set it up said it specifically so they could have a Copenhagen type cafe in a small rural community. It's just rejuvenated the whole village because young people want to live there because they're getting something over and above what rural communities could otherwise offer. This is a very basic accommodation. It's about £70 a night. It's got a loo in the back, and it's booked out on booking.com all the time, every night just about. So village halls have got to think a bit more commercially, I think. Put a shepherd's hut in the garden, put a shed in the garden. Any tourists, they want experiences, these people who come down now. I think this could really be an answer for community buildings. We just need to think a bit more cleverly. This is a village hall in Denmark. It's a woodworking room. Our village halls are empty nearly all the time in small rural communities. This is a really cheap way of offering more to a community, and also a really nice way of older residents passing over to younger people in the village. It just makes a great deal of sense, like everything I saw in Denmark did. And this is another room in a village hall. This is a physio room. people are able to come here and exercise or ask their physio in if they're recuperating. The physio comes in and they pay for the use of this hall. Very clever use of a community building. And this is a physio garden. This was in a small village hall. This is recuperation. People had steps, they had wonky ground to walk over. It was just thinking about community buildings in a much broader way and making it available and attractive to a very wide range of people. So also, there was never a community building in Denmark that didn't have a second-hand shop, so another source of income. So as I said before, I think villages are on a knife edge. They're getting smaller and smaller, like Lamorna and Mousel. And in 10 years' time, I just really worry about that. And I think one of the answers is for them to work together in a village cluster. So you'd have more churn of people of different ages and of ideas. And this is something they're doing well in Denmark. You can see here 3 main clusters. Those red dots are all villages, and they have been formed into formal arrangements of clusters. So some small villages had to kind of agree to almost let go their community buildings, but it was all for the greater good. And I think this is a model that we should be looking at in Cornwall, that we should be encouraging working between small rural communities. So say, for example, if Lamorna, Poole and Mousel made a cluster, so much could come of that. I can't see any negatives that would come of that. But again, sitting here in Lamorna thinking, how on earth do I make that work? You just think, oh my goodness, that is such hard work. How do I start that conversation? And I don't know the answer yet, but you know, maybe in a year I will. Ooh, hang on, sorry. So this was an idea. They had it's between small villages over weekends throughout the summer. They had running and cycling routes. So this would rotate around the small villages. So you'd have 3 or 4 working together. Next Saturday, they'd put out a route, and the village that hosted it would put on a barbecue. This was a way of bringing small rural communities together, and it was an enormous success. I mean, you can see the people, and again, it was that, you know, what can we do to have a bit more fun, and that in turn, I am certain, has an effect on the rural economy. This was the medal everybody got for doing that, and you see the little red hearts. Those are all the villages in that northern area of Denmark. So it's just very clever. And then going on to outdoor living, I don't think in Cornwall we have enough joined up thinking about how we use our outdoors. I think that's becoming even more obvious now. We're all outdoors more because of COVID. In Denmark, they have these sleeping platforms that are just there. You can either book them online for £3 a night, or some of them are unbookable, so they're available for people to use. Imagine if the National Trust or the estates had these dotted around Cornwall. They all had a small campfire. Some of them have water, and it was just a really nice way of getting people out and about, and especially for local people doing all this stuff for tourists. But you know, really, what is there for young people or older people, anybody down here, is not the most in the world, and I think we could do it a bit better and a bit cleverer. And this was in a big island called Funen in Denmark, southern Denmark, and they built 50 of these shelters that they sleep between 2 and 7 people, and they'd set up a trail, 200-kilometre trail around the island of Funen. Imagine that around Cornwall, if you could cycle or walk or run between these camping areas. It's just lovely, and also it'd be lovely if it could be somehow for locals. And outdoor cooking, the thing to remember is Denmark has exactly the same climate as us, just about. Where have you ever seen that in Cornwall? I haven't. There's no celebration of bringing people together in a really simple way here, and I think that's really attractive for all ages, and just would make Cornwall a really cool place to live. Even it is already, but it could be way cooler, I think. I'm very, very keen to have a conversation about second homes. One of the things I do, I have a small business that sells Cornish smokes, and I go to shows like Crufts and Hampton Court Flower Show, and 8 times a day people will say, oh, I've got a second home in Cornwall. And I was always really nice about it until once I was in the Cotswolds and I said, oh, that's really nice, where's your house? And the woman could not remember where her second homes were. was. So after 15 seconds, you remembered it was a Mclennan. And I just thought I need to have this conversation. So every show from then on, I had a conversation about second homes. And I think it's a conversation everybody is scared to have. It's crazy. These people are moving into our communities. We want them to be part of a community. They're the ones with the money, and they are, in a way, the future of our communities. And nobody is having this conversation. And this photo, in Denmark, they have mayors, which I think worked brilliantly, and I wish it was something we had more of here. And they twice a year have an incomers brunch. So the lady on the left says she's an incomer and the baby was born there, so she's a local. And just having that conversation of, you know, we are the community you've spent a lot of money coming into. We would like you to be part of us, but nobody does it. And I think Cornwall Council now doesn't have a list of second homes, which I think it used to. So that makes it quite hard to find where these people are. But we've now invited all the 5 new house owners in Lamorna to a brunch when we can come together. But I'm passionate about having a conversation about second homes, and I think people run really scared of it, and I think there's an enormous amount to be gained by it. Cornwall Community Foundation have a second home owners club where they ask people to pay a week's rent per year, which they then, as you know, distribute to community projects. And I think we need to be braver. I just think we need to do it, and I'd love to do that. Sorry, these are just 2 very little random things. A smokehouse. So cafe one side, smoked fish the other side. We don't add value to our products here enough. I couldn't tell you, well, you will have seen it, the value of the cars that were driving through Newlyn and Penzance in the summer. Once I was behind a Porsche, a Range Rover and a Mercedes. The money is pouring down here, and I don't think we're clever enough at taking that money off those people who really want to spend it with us because they want our lives and they want to experience real Cornwall. And I think we're not adding enough and selling direct to consumers who are driving past our doors. Finally, that shouldn't really be in there. And this is a terrible photo, but the very poor part of Denmark in the south, the 2 islands called Lolland and Falster, and they just got fed up with being, you know, saying, oh, you're the scabby part of Denmark. And there was a 6-part programme about them. And then they just created on Facebook Love Storm Lolland Falster, and they now have 24,000 people on Facebook. Every time something good happens in Lolland Falster, it goes on Facebook. People are moving back to the area. People are moving from Copenhagen. Jobs are being created because everybody's fallen in love with Lolland Falster. So they've completely turned it on its head from being the poor part that nobody wanted to live in and everybody's laughed at to, yeah, that's a really cool part because there's a community down there and we want to be part of that. And my final slide is, you know, they've even made it into products. So there's something to be learnt there, and that was all a bit random compared to what you've seen already, I'm sure. Is that finished now? Can you see me now?
Liz, need to unshare. Perfect.
Am I there now?
Yeah, we're back to normal, Liz. Thank you.
So that was all a bit of a gabble, and I'm sure it's been much on a different scale to what you've heard from other experts, but that's what I feel, and that's what I've seen, and that's what I've learned.
So Liz, thank you. I mean, when I heard the presentation last time around, obviously we spent more time on it, so we've had a very good canter through today. But I really absolutely supported the ideas of communities managing to somehow commercialise activities within village centres, because unfortunately money is the fragrant grease that makes the world go round, and you have to have some funding streams coming forward. And I think actually taking responsibility for those funding streams at a community level is a really important lesson that we can learn and somehow adopt. I really did love the idea of those sleeping platforms as well. Mm. I mean, if you invited me on a 10-day walking holiday around Cornwall to leapfrog between them, I would be absolutely Brilliant. Up for it. But anyway, let me go to my panel. We'll have a conversation. But before I do so, I can see that Janet Dwyer, we're actually running about 10 minutes late. Janet, are you okay with that? Janet's typing. She's fine. Brilliant. OK, so let's go first this time around to Jane Pascoe. Councillor Jane Pascoe, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. That was fascinating. Thank you. That was lovely. It was such a vibrant talk. Thank you very much. And I was really interested, you know, about your woodwork room. We only had a conversation the other day. I worry because in some of my villages, I have some lonely single people who generally gentlemen, and I find it difficult to get them to sort of social, you know, to get in. I mean, obviously it's difficult at the moment, but prior to COVID, to get them integrated in, and I've been looking for some way of having a carpentry shop or something like that, and you know, a shed. I think that would be a really good idea. So thank you for that. Yes, I hear what you're saying. You probably heard me having a little bit of a go about I'm in an area where we're out on a limb. We aren't really out on the limb, we're on the A38 trunk road, but we just seem to get forgotten up here. So maybe that is a good thing about the Facebook. Maybe we should keep printing things about, posting things about what we get right up there, and it will help investment. So no, I was absolutely fascinated. I was interested with your cycling. Was it predominantly flat in Denmark?
It's completely flat.
Yeah, that's what I thought, yes. Which is probably how you get so many cyclists. They sort of wane a bit when they look at our hills around here. But again, we're putting cycle trails and things, you know, into Cornwall, quite a lot of them that are going to link up. So I'm hoping that will attract more people to come down and start exploring and discovering our beauty. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and let's this time go to Councillor Mike Mclennan. Mike, you there?
He's having his cup of tea. Don't blame him.
Oh, I don't drink tea. My dog's just played up, so sorry, apologies. Very interesting. Have I got more than a minute this time, Chairman?
Yeah, you carry on.
I live in Coombe, which is near St Stephen in Branwell. You may not know it actually, but I've been here 14 years, and about 11 years ago, they said to me, the local residents in a small village, we need to start a community hall. And my background is negotiations and sales, ducker and diver. So we cleared the debt that Laconic wanted, and we started, and we got £80,000 in to start the whole community hall going. I gave the 3 local middle-aged women 2 weeks to get the money in, and they did it. They said, you're a tough taskmaster. Our hall, when it's open, caters for anything from bingo, art clubs, reading book clubs, curry nights, etc. So I think we do a really good job. We were worried from day one. I've got a worry guts who's the next teacher in Cornwall, who's a brilliant woman, and she said, "Oh, we won't make money. We make money. We're not supposed to make money, but we haven't got any debts, so we can cover our debts, any costs." If I go into other places, 2 social clubs where they cater for older people, and in Nampin, they've got a social club for many things, quizzes, etc., etc. Nice concept, Denmark. I was hoping you were giving me some examples of what I'm missing out on doing in Cornwall, with respect. But I haven't got the room here in my village to put any sleep in, because someone's got some 8 farmhouse places up the road that she puts people up. I can't see, and I'd like to know more, or not about perhaps Denmark with respect. Perhaps I'm missing a trick that I could develop more at my local level. That's simple. Can't do any building work. There's no space, but we have a horse show, we have a fete, and we've got tennis courts in the village. So everything's really run properly by committees. The major point I would agree with you is what happens when I pass on to that football ground in the sky and there's no one coming up behind us. It's a discussion we have here because we're all quite energetic still, and we get good attendances, but what happens, because the youngsters aren't here anyway, and it's the same in other areas, what happens then about continuity? And I think your point there is the most major point that I accept, actually. So it's a real problem. Thank you.
Okay, Liz, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I think your village, as I was saying, to me, there's 3 different types of village. I think yours is obviously a larger one that has a lot of amenities and has a mixed age of people who are able to help. I think
houses, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you will probably be maybe facing in 10 years what the small villages are facing now, that you don't have those volunteers who are able to do it unpaid. So that's my point, really. I think I hope you didn't think I was concentrating too much on demo. I pulled out things that I think are translatable here. And say you had a village hall like ours in Lamorna that's empty, and you had a vibrant cafe in there that took money off the tourists in the summer and then provided for the community in the winter, but at the same time became a commercial asset that didn't have to rely on volunteers and could provide Wi-Fi or working from home facilities. It would be its own entity without worry, which hopefully you won't face in the future, but we are right now.
Can I come back? I think you're right about the people coming forward, and we're not very big. It's scattered.
Yeah.
But if I just go back a few years, instance Steve social, they wanted to put a cafe in there, and they were going to pay someone to do it, and they wanted a grant from the parish council to help towards it. And I'm a sort of parish council as well as a Cornwall councillor. So I'm walking round, working out quickly in my good old brain how many sandwiches they got to sell a day. Bits of cake and cups of coffee for to make it viable. And what they were intending to pay somebody, they hadn't even thought through their business plan. They're going to pay some £25,000 a year to run a little cafe in a little very small village, bigger than mine. But it just wasn't. Anyway, as council, we had the kitchen done for them, and then it wasn't viable. But I would like to know more of some of your other stories or experiences in Cornwall that I perhaps can do at a local level, because I haven't got the space to develop. I think it looks wonderful, Denmark, wonderful, but they've got a bit more land than what I've got. So I would appreciate some help from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Jim Mckenna.
Councillor Pete Leroy, thank you. Liz, hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. You all right?
Yeah, good, thank you. Just a couple of comments and then just a couple of questions as well. I mean, I spend a fair amount of time in Mousehole. I wouldn't say it was decimated necessarily. They're always doing things, and there are definitely more than 6 volunteers, which I think is a good thing. So, although the lights are off this year, which is definitely not good. So, are you able to share the slides to assist us with our sort of conclusions and things? Is that possible, or is that not?
Yeah, no, it's completely possible. Do you want me to go back to beginning again?
No, not now, as in physically. Could we have them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We have a heart attack here because I'm delaying things. So if we could have access to them to have a look at them afterwards, that would be fabulous.
Yeah.
You talked about villages and things and possibly not collaborating, and I get the football analogy where you hate your neighbours. So Leeds fans hate everybody, by the way, but that's just the way it is. You'll be interested to know possibly the new Cornwall Council divisions in 2021. Newlyn, Mousehole, Paul, St Burren and Lamorna are all going to be the same representative. So St Burren is being included. So I would say there's some opportunity there to get whoever is elected to collaborate and maybe help you with some of those things across the 5 villages.
Yeah.
I was particularly interested in your sporting stuff, as in the inter sort of village, if not competition, but certainly sort of they were all doing and sort of rotating and all those things and making that a bigger social thing, because I guess that would help with rural isolation. I guess it would help with one village then collaborating with another on something different. So that is something I'd be really interested in learning a bit more about. And the final thing I would say is and this is sort of part of what we say, what one thing would you like Cornwall Council to do more of? That can be the council or it could be your local representative. Excellent. I can relax.
No, you can't, but I am allowed time to think about that. I don't think I feel I have any way of maybe just communication, really. I don't feel I have any input into Cornwall councillors. If I was struggling with something in the community, I would feel I would go unheard. Is that unfair? But that's what you asked me. I wouldn't know how to join up the tiny nitty gritty of a village with what you might possibly be able to help with. I think in my head, and I think in lots of people's head, your budget has, through no fault of your own, been so cut that you are not in a position to help me or small rural communities.
Okay, I'm not saying we could give you 100,000, but I'm
No.
certain I'm certain there would be some things that councillors could do, either the town council or the local Cornwall councillor, or indeed other people, such as the landscape partnership, which you know about.
Yeah.
The different things it could do. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And the presentation was brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jim.
So, thanks, Jim. And when you asked Liz what she felt Cornwall Council could bring forward, I thought, well, how can you describe something that doesn't exist? And I think one of the things that Kate was talking about earlier was rural strategies, which we don't really seem to have. We seem to have been quite good at thinking about towns and the larger conurbations and the city of Truro and so on. But what we haven't thought about is where the values lie within our rural communities. And that is effectively really what this group or this panel has all been about. It's about looking at about everything that isn't a town. So maybe, Liz, what you were suggesting was that Cornwall Council should actually have a strategy for communicating with rural communities to bring them together.
I think that's what I was trying to say. I just didn't say it very well. I would also really love, as a county, to really look at that that idea of a trail with sleeping places. I think that's genius, and I think it's doable, and I think it would be brilliant for Cornwall. Just more joined up thinking, I think, is what I'd like to see. Everybody seems to be fighting in their pillowcase in the village to get out, to get stuff done, and it's just really hard work then. But if you had some sense of strategy, or somewhere to go, or somewhere to ask for help, or someone to say, hey, how are you getting on over there? Can we chat? Can we join up? And it doesn't feel like that exists.
Okay, Liz, and I don't for one moment wish to put words into your mouth, Liz, but I think you did say that you would encourage Cornwall Council to help communities provide commercial activity in order to financially support themselves. Yeah,
I think that is unfortunately the future we're going to have to move to. It's a good and it's a bad thing, but I think it's inevitable, or else villages and their communities are going to die on their feet, and young people are never going to want to stay here. And I'm also not going to let you off the second homes thing. We need to have that conversation, and everybody runs scared from it. And I know from all the conversations I had that it's a very positive outcome. People are happy to have that conversation, and we can't just let these these villages be sold off. And then with that, and that to go under the radar and not to be addressed in any way. And everybody drops their heads when you talk about second homes. Oh, we can't do anything. It's just it's just the market. But I'm sorry, I think you can do it on a local level, and I think only good can come of it. And I don't know what you do as a council, but we can't keep quiet any longer. It's crazy to keep quiet about something that is the thing that is affecting our small rural communities, and nobody's talking about it.
St Ives are.
St Ives are.
Planning, yeah. So
yeah, but it wasn't that successful what they did on the planning front, was it? But blah blah blah. But I just think we need to talk more about everything.
So an examination of the second home ownership issue.
Yeah, and
we're not second guessing where that conversation may end up. It's just to have the conversation.
Yeah, and and it may be that's it. But it's
David.
Okay, so I've got three things from you, Liz. Rural communication strategy, to encourage communities to engage in commercial activities, and whether that's just being a bit more flexible with planning permission approaches, that sort of thing, I don't know. And then to have the conversation about second homes and the way they affect communities.
Yeah, and those outdoor sleeping platforms, that's important, that one.
What do you want to call it? The Liz Wilkins Trail, yes?
No. The Cornwall trail, outdoor trail with sleeping platforms. I don't know.
Lebroy's Lilo.
Okay, so Jim, go ahead.
It was simply, firstly, David wants to come in quickly, I think, and secondly, could we add social to economic in terms of intercommunity?
Yeah.
One may well
Commercial
lead
and social activities. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So David Rodder, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. David Rodder,
Hello.
Economic
Hi.
Growth Manager. Hi, Liz.
Hi.
Really good to hear you again. I think just to give you some, it's for the panel to make their recommendations, of course, but Malcolm Bell, when he spoke earlier in the week or earlier in the sessions, was talking about activity to spread the benefit of the tourism industry and our visitors across Cornwall, perhaps to other areas where they don't normally get to. Different markets, experience markets, and those sorts of things. And I think he was also mentioned motorhome kind of drop down areas in villages, which you see on the continent, but you don't see over here very often for that type of activity. So the council does own a lot of land around, little bits of land all over the place across Cornwall. So if a village hall or a local community hasn't got it, it might be that we could develop that trail. So that's an interesting thought that might well come out in the recommendations, I would have thought. In terms of second homes, I did see some data this week and I was desperately searching for it, but I can't for the life of me find out where I remember where I filed it for the moment, but I will find it, that was putting second home data and a map across Cornwall.
That'll
And it
be good.
ranges from 47% in St Minver Lowlands, which is Port Isaac, to 0.7% in Redruth. And there's a map, and every area has got a list of how many second homes. It's 2018 data. I don't think it's been updated since then.
Okay.
But it does show that there's a wide range across the county.
Thank you. So just two very quick points coming back. Okay, let's not just do data on second home. Let's actually somehow do more than data, but thank you for that, David. And the other thing is on the trail, let's not just sell it as a tourist attraction. Let's make it for local people too.
Absolutely.
Yes, yeah. I think it's really so easy for locals to go, I'll just lie here and take it, for 2 months, and then in the winter it will rain. I think we're not quite having enough fun in Cornwall.
Okay, so Liz, I'm certainly not having enough fun because
You're over time.
Feel like I've spent the last 3 weeks in front of my computer screen.
Well, I'm sorry to go over time.
No, not at all. We started very late with you. But Liz, thank you very much indeed. I loved your presentation first time. I loved the energy in it and some of the ideas this time around as well. Very grateful for your time, and thank you very much indeed for attending.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you, Liz.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so panel, we shall now ask Janet Dwyer to come forward, if that's okay, Janet, please. So Janet, yes, there you are. Well, welcome to our group. We are an inquiry panel of Cornwall Council looking at the economic vitality of rural and coastal areas in Cornwall. I'm sure you know that bit, I don't need to tell you. So what we have done so far, we've asked our witnesses to come forward with their sort of 10 to 12 minutes. Don't really have to use it all. Whatever your take on the rural vitality aspects of Cornwall and wider areas, of course, because your experience isn't, of course, only Cornwall. And then we'll come to you one by one with the panel and just have an informal chat. So thank you very much indeed for attending, and apologies for being late, Janet. The floor's yours.
That's all right. It's absolutely fine. I really enjoyed listening to what Liz had to say, so it was really useful to be joining you a little bit early. And, this is the least I can do, to be a bit patient, because I come feeling very humbled and very empathetic, I think, with the challenges that Cornwall faces. I couldn't claim to be an expert on Cornwall. My work has been on rural development at a European level and in various parts of the UK. I've never done a detailed study in Cornwall. I've known David Rodder for more than 20 years, and we've exchanged a lot of information over those years. But I don't wish to claim more knowledge than I have. Hopefully I'm here because I can maybe think about ideas from other things I've seen and things I've been thinking about that might be helpful for you. But I apologise in advance if I say things which seem like I'm telling grandma to suck eggs, I'm very aware that Cornwall has had a legacy of funding from the European Union, which has given it an advantage in respect of strategic thinking about some of these issues. And I think that shows when I read the background papers for this inquiry, to see a county council able to operate at this level of strategic thinking, forward thinking, planning is really impressive. And I think you should be very proud of that. But I also feel for you because of what's happening, you know, because of Brexit being just already part happened and then concluding within the next few weeks, and still so much uncertainty about what comes next. And I don't know whether you've secured any guarantees from Whitehall in respect of the future funding streams that will come down to the southwest. But we all know from the media coverage about the focus on the red wall and the look north in respect of the government's possible strategies in future in terms of where it's going to invest to secure its own political future. So I do feel for you, and I do worry about the future. And I'm sorry about that being a rather negative way maybe to start. However, in my role in Gloucestershire and in partnership with people in Newcastle and Warwick, we've just launched a National Innovation Centre for Rural Enterprise, which I think might be one of the reasons why David thought I might be able to come and offer you something useful today. And we're very much focusing on thinking about rural innovation and enterprise from the ground up in a condition of uncertainty where the funding and future policies and plans at the central level are likely to be absent for some time, shall we say, for a variety of reasons. I think there are huge positives in respect of both the rural economy and the particular situation of Cornwall that, despite all the challenges, you need to keep your eyes focused on as you move forward. So that's just a few sort of context comments. I'm sorry that's taken rather a long time. If I think about what would be my priorities now, it's not clear from your briefing quite where your time perspective is, but I think there are tremendous lessons to be learned from the current period, from the COVID shock and how people have adapted. I don't know what you've seen in Cornwall, but I've seen, certainly around here in Gloucestershire, tremendous adaptation by businesses. Tremendous rethinking, reimagining how business can be done, changing incredibly quickly. I've been trying to think about what it is that makes that more successful as a process. And one of the other things that I think I've taken from that is that it's more likely to happen with businesses that are embedded within their communities, who feel a sense of responsibility in sense of their operation, because what it requires is flexibility of resource. So it requires somebody who was once doing one thing to be doing something different and to be willing to do that and to be committed to doing that because it's the survival of the business that's at stake. I think one of the challenges that when you look at the report that you produced on statistics of economic and social situation in Cornwall, you have a quarter of your workforce self-employed and you have a lot of people working in hospitality and food services. And I put those two things together and I think there's probably quite a lot of sort of 0 hours or insecure kinds of employment. And that will make that sort of adaptation difficult. It's not to say it won't happen, but it will happen without that kind of feeling of pulling together for a common cause. So in respect of sort of thinking about how you go forward, I think fostering wherever possible those kinds of micro business that have an employment capacity and that can build that kind of sense of community is really important. Not sure quite how you get there, but I think one way to think about it is about networks, starting with networks. Some of the most successful adaptation that I've seen has been where businesses work together because they know each other, because they trade with each other, because the whole of the success of their economic venture depends upon other businesses. So the more people are networked, I think the more this kind of resilient response is possible. And although COVID is, you know, a very unusual occurrence, it's an indication of a kind of phenomenon that I think is going to continue, which is this kind of uncertainty of future trading conditions caused by a combination of climate change, the need to make some really radical transformations in how we do things over the next 10 or 20 years, as the Prime Minister has just been saying today, although that was more words than commitment to resource, I fear. But I think uncertainty is going to be a feature of future operations, and therefore trying to build resilience into business structures is going to be very important. I think another thing I wanted to talk about is structural imbalance or inequality in respect of Cornwall's economy and Cornwall's communities. Liz touched on some of these issues when she talked about the need to explicitly look at the second homes issue. I mean, I come to Cornwall probably 1 week a year on holiday, rent a place, because self-catering is the most flexible sort of option. And yeah, the visible kind of consequence of inequality in respect to the people who come in and the people who are there all the time is palpable and makes you think all the time about how does one respectfully try to address that. And I think sometimes it's about responsibility. So Liz talked about drawing people in through conversation, but I think there's more than that. I think with people who have economic activities, trying to make a direct link. So, people have talked before about tourist taxes and things like that. It may not be as abrupt as that, but I think there is a need to sort of think about how does one draw on that greater resource that you have in Cornwall, where you have lots of people coming in who have significant wealth. And where is your ability as a county council to try and encourage that wealth to stay within the county? Successful business offers are obviously part of that, but they're not all of that. And charging for car parks and toilets is difficult and often abused. So yeah, I think there's almost a need for sort of thinking about this with business and local communities. What different solutions could one use? And then the other way to try and address some of these inequalities is to invest in making up the gaps, I suppose. And that depends upon you having resources, which I can't presume that you will have, but I think creative ways of thinking about where do we not have enough of something. I would say focus on SMEs, but not the single people businesses, but the smaller mixed businesses, and looking for people offering something that links between, say, food production and hospitality, or food production and education, or land, nature and health, or things that will, as Liz pointed out, if you can find a business asset that offers a benefit to the local community as well as to a potential tourist market, again, that gives you added resilience. I was thinking about, in my part of the world, a leader project where a very successful vegetable producing business, which had been wholesaling, had been selling through a local shop, closed the shop, went back to the farm because the shop was too expensive to maintain, and then Leader funded them to open a cafe. And that was in a village where there was nothing else. Well, there was a gastropub, but otherwise nothing else. And the cafe has been a real benefit to the community, to older people who wouldn't necessarily be able to travel out of the village to go and get their coffees, but having it in the village, it's been good for the village. It's been good for the business, because often a cafe provides resilience for businesses that are selling food products which are in themselves not necessarily particularly expensive. I mean, for them it was fruit and veg, which isn't a particularly expensive kind of output, and the cafes really made that business successful. So that the National Trust does that all the time. The cafes are what make the money on their properties, and that helps to fund the significant cost of trying to maintain the property. We can't have cafes absolutely everywhere, but you can probably absorb more cafes in Cornwall than in most places. Sorry if this all sounds very familiar, I don't know. I think another thing that bothers me is that I think if you look around rural England, we have a legacy now of a lot of interesting businesses that were started in the 80s and 90s because of the funding that came from Europe under 5B and then under successive leader programs and other regional development initiatives. And what I fear now is succession as an issue for many of those businesses, small businesses producing individual or unique or very special products, and with significant obstacles to the next generation taking those businesses on. So I would suggest that's an area that's really worth focusing. Up here we had a cheesemaker who died of a heart attack, and that business has gone. And it's such a shame, because that was a business that was really successful, producing a whole range of cheeses, but there was nobody else with that person's particular passion and engagement. So I think the more that you can do to encourage, I mean, I know with farming, it's been tried with the, matching of young people wanting to farm with older people who don't have successors. I think it can be equally as important in small scale manufacturing and craft businesses and so forth. And then the other thing I suppose to say is really thinking about the creative ways in which Cornwall can benefit from a decarbonising agenda. Some of this does require investment on a scale that at the moment is not clear to see where that will come from. But the housing stock, and I don't mean the very luxurious second homes. I mean the basic housing stock in which most people live, and fuel issues, moving people off gas or off other forms of fossil fuels is going to be a massive challenge. I don't know whether in your negotiations with central government over deals, whether these sorts of things will come up with the agenda, but it seems to me there's lots of arguments why Cornwall should be one of the first counties to be able to move in this direction. Rurality, remoteness and decarbonising need to be addressed together. I find it difficult to articulate exactly why, but I think in some senses the rural can lead with this, because the rural has not been so much absorbed by big centralised provision in the past. I think actually it would have been great if Liz had been able, when she was in Denmark, also to look at how Denmark organises combined heat and power at the local level for villages. It's something that makes such a lot of sense. In my village, we were lucky with downsizing to have the investment then to fund a pellet boiler for our own house. But when I was putting it in, I was thinking, this pellet boiler, if you designed it right, it could service the 6 houses in my row, but all the other houses in my row are housing authority. We're in the middle of one of these 80s houses that was sold from a council house and became a private one. That's a really important point. It's much more efficient to do those kinds of bioenergy solutions collectively. So again, I come back to sort of the importance of building networks in thinking about strategic development in the medium term. I've got a whole load of other things that I could say, but I've probably talked too long and you may have found this all very general. I'm very interested to hear any questions you might have and to try and seek to answer them. And I'm also very willing to follow up with a little bit of further work if you like. We have previously within the CCRI done a fair bit of work on fisheries, on farming, on added value, and on 1 or 2 other issues that could be relevant to you.
Janet, thanks. One of the things that I've been really super keen on is the principles, and to the very last thing you said about added value, in terms of if you are producing a raw material of whatever nature it is, whether it's China clay or whether it's lithium, that you don't just commoditize that product and let it go. I'd be very interested to hear any work that you've done in that direction.
Well, it's one of the things that I really want to start this year in North Gloucestershire, is to look at the way in which I think that we have a really good added value chain that's developed here from farmers or young generation would-be farmers innovating with product and then generating from that product other people who then want to add value to that product. So the obvious example for us here is Cotswold Gold rapeseed oil, which was taking a commodity product, doing a cold pressing of it like you do with extra virgin olive oil, and offering it in nice bottles as a high value end product. Not only does Cotswold Gold sell very well here, but another company is now set up which takes Cotswold Gold and adds flavourings to it, smokes it and adds rosemary and garlic and sells it as roast potato oil, and that's been very successful. Other producers and service providers are using Cotswold Gold in their other products, and so there's a kind of, as a cluster, it's almost like an industrial cluster in northern Italy of somebody starting with an innovation and then others picking it up. I think that happens through good networks, through good networks between would-be entrepreneurs and people with existing interesting products. And it's partly this interdependence between businesses. The more they talk together, I don't know how good that is in Cornwall. I don't know how much your businesses connect.
Yeah, a fascinating thought, which is just almost developing in my mind as we speak. David might have already done this work, but yeah. I would be very interested to know for this panel a list of all the raw materials that but effectively, yeah, raw materials that Cornwall is producing, and perhaps to actually look at the links between them. I mean, it was quite interesting to hear the gentleman earlier on that was exporting China clay from Falmouth docks. And I was just thinking, well, I wonder, are there empty ships coming into Falmouth docks to be filled up with China clay? I don't know, but it would just be interested to know actually what all of our industries are, to actually look at them on one page.
And you have potentially massive diversity in your basic primary production, you know, because Cornwall has it has small scale farms, but it has a great diversity of potential product. You can crop, you can produce livestock, you can you can do lots of things, but probably pretty much at fairly small scales at the moment. But that gives you a lot of potential for different types of adding value through the food chain. I imagine in respect of China clay, I was thinking this too, because I've been watching those Simon Reeve programs the last 2 weekends and thinking about that. And I've been to St Austell, obviously been to the Eden project and looked around, but it's a fantastically valuable primary resource, isn't it? If you could find a way of adding value to that locally in some small way, it could grow.
Wonderful. Right, okay, let me bring in now, I think Jim Mckenna, Councillor Jim Mckenna we'll go with.
Peter, thank you. Janet, that was fascinating, thank you. Jim Mckenna, Cornwall Councillor for Penzance Promenade, so the far west. I just had two questions really. Understandably, you talked about economic uncertainty, particularly in the context of Brexit, but actually potentially beyond that, and the need to build resilience. If you had one example of sort of something which would improve that from elsewhere, would you be able to sort of cite something that could apply to Cornwall? And my second question is a much more basic one. The tourist tax seems to have been mooted several times. For the life of me, particularly with once we're sort of through COVID, I suspect there'll be more people wanting to sort of staycation, as they call it. I, for the life of me, can't see why we can't actually push that, possibly working with other tourist areas. Even if it's just £1 a night, you aggregate that into millions of stays and you've got something which could be significant. So I just wondered whether you're aware of that working elsewhere, if not in this country then elsewhere. I had heard places in Germany did it, but I wasn't sure. So thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. So should I answer those straight away? Okay.
Yeah,
so
please.
Building resilience. Well, I won't repeat myself, but that example of interdependence of small businesses, I think is really important. And to do that, you need to set up networks and you need to promote information sharing and meeting and discussion between businesses with common potential interests, and that might be up and down supply chains, or it might be about locational similarity. You know, if we're all facing the same sort of market, you know, people might come together. How it happens, I think, you know, it is often a question of identifying the people who would be interested in reaching out to others, and looking at where you already have businesses that are building those links, and just to try to help them to go further. I think another element in building resilience is about a kind of an underpinning infrastructure. So that would be thinking about things like how do your knowledge providers in the county link up with business? I don't know whether you have business hubs operating out from universities like exists in other parts of the country. I don't know whether your colleges have very flexible sorts of provision to help become those hubs that people would go to find out about what else is going on. I excuse my ignorance if it's already really very good. It seems to me that I can demonstrate by an example of where it really is really bad. I've been doing some work in Malta with them on their rural development programme, and they have a situation where they have universities and colleges and even practical FE type colleges, which really don't reach out to local business at all. And what that means is the people who qualify from those places just go away, they leave, because they've not made any kind of connection with the businesses in the areas where they've trained. And that's such a waste of potential. And many of them don't necessarily want to leave Malta, but they've not been made to think that there's anything there for them. So I think that connection is really important. What else? I guess sometimes there have been some really interesting examples in my part of the world in linking up farming and non-farming in business development, and in community linkages as well between farms and communities. So for us, it's probably something you might have heard of already, the sort of experiments that have happened with natural flood management in Gloucestershire, with farmers and local communities together trying to work out why floods happen where they do, and why the damage is always to certain houses and where it's coming from. And sometimes it's issues of blocked culverts, sometimes it's issues of water moving too fast down a catchment. And often the remedies for that are very simple things that if a community is willing to spend the day on the farm with somebody with a JCB, between them, they can do a lot at not much cost. And the benefit of that activity is that it then builds a connection that wasn't necessarily there before, and starts a dialogue about, how can we cope if these sorts of things happen in future? How can we better cope? So it's an example that's from an environmental dimension, but I think it has social relevance in respect of building those connections. And it is something I'm very aware of, having worked with the agricultural sector for a long time, that these days farming doesn't naturally connect with a lot of other people, and farming communities can become very isolated. And so this kind of activity, and often just stimulated by putting a part-time project officer in whose work is to sort of bring communities or bring actors together, is really important. And you can also work obviously through the rural community councils. In Gloucestershire, it's the Rural Community Council that's a key actor in some of that process. Does that help?
Thank you. Yes. And
tourism tax. Well, every time I go to a meeting in Brussels, I pay a €1 supplement on my room in my hotel.
So it can be done.
It happens everywhere at that very low level across Europe, as far as I'm aware. €1 might not be enough per night, and that may only happen in hotels. And you would need to think about what you do about self-catering, but most of those places will be rented through companies. There will be ways of thinking about it. Their call will always be that this is reducing the revenue to the business, and that's important to Cornwall as well. But I think given that huge inequality factor that I was talking about earlier, it would be fair, more fair.
Thank you. And the one thing I always think about when I go through Gloucestershire, I always stop at Gloucester Services, and there are some 200 and odd businesses supported by that place. And I just think there may be some lessons we can learn from that.
Yes, and Gloucester Services was built from the model from Tebay, wasn't it? Which
yes, I know Tebay very well, because I'm from the northwest. So So.
And that was farmer-led, wasn't it? And it was using the money that it got from the compensation to drive the facility through their land.
Yes, so there may be some things we could learn from that, Chairman. The site visit would be a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly like the collaboration idea, and also the idea of allowing or providing marketplaces, or non-traditional marketplaces, for producers to be able to attend at relatively low cost. I mean, I've often thought that empty shop units in towns ought to be forced to open up as collaborative, cooperatives, I suppose you'd probably call it, wouldn't you?
The whole pop-up economy, it's really got going, hasn't it? And that's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I just want to especially thank David Rodder for the cauliflower cheese comment. That's excellent. Mike Mclennan, would you like to have a chat with Janet?
Thank you, Janet.
Councillor.
Thank you, Janet. I'm look after the area St Stephen in Brannell. This is the clay country. I'm interested in, and my colleague and friend Jim mentioned about Brexit to you. You opened up on Brexit, and you obviously got a lot of experience working it. It seems doom and gloom to me what you've just said, and it's made me concerned because you're close to it. Is it going to affect it if we don't get a deal? Is it going to affect it badly down here in Cornwall?
I think it's very likely we will get a deal, but it will be what they're calling a thin deal. So it will be we won't get sudden tariffs imposed on lots of trade sectors. That's my fingers crossed prediction. Either way, if we get that, or if we were to get a no deal, the trade aspect for Cornwall is most damaging in respect of fisheries, because most of your fisheries product goes out of the UK to other countries. Spain, isn't it? A lot is a major consumer. So you would potentially lose market there, and they would seek to source their product from elsewhere. I think I'm more concerned about policy and the fact that you've had 20 odd years, more than 20 years of European funding devoted to Cornwall on the basis of your relative deprivation by comparison with the average, both within the UK and across Europe as a whole. And that once that goes, you then have to rely on Whitehall deciding that Cornwall merits special funding. So it depends what you feel about having had that stream of money from the European Regional Development Fund, the European Social Fund, and in some of the periods, additional funding through the Common Agricultural Policy Rural Development Wing, as a result of your relatively low levels of GDP per capita and other measures of relative wealth. So if that European money disappears, is there any guarantee from the UK that they will replace it? And my comments are really that because the focus of political activity has been on capturing this new vote in the north of the country, where a lot of people feel very left behind, and there are many serious issues of poverty and deprivation, that would be where, in a period after COVID, when public resources are going to be stretched, the focus might well be more on providing in the north than it would be on providing in the southwest. So that's why I'm worried. It's about public funding. It's not so much about the trade thing.
I think you're right, actually. I think, well, you are right. You wouldn't have a professor behind you. Yeah. My view is, listen to these witnesses, and only been here 14 years. I don't think Cornwall's helped themselves. I think Cornwall have been a bit slow in knocking at the doors and being very proactive. They realise the tourist trade isn't the be-all, because it's 30% private business involved with it. So somehow they're sort of trying to catch up, and they're a long way behind. And surely you must have seen that. But I don't. If you want to comment, that's fine. But I've got a couple more questions on you. We've heard today, and I think you touched on it from other witnesses, about keeping talent in the county. Now, I'm going to just do my own son example. He's living here, moved out of London because he couldn't afford his rent of £1,000 a month rent, just sitting in a room. So he's here now. Very quiet chap, 32, no trouble, and no problem. And I sit and have a chat. I said, do you miss things? And he said, well, I miss seeing my friends, because where he is in London, it's easy to pop out and get a snack or a meal and all that. And it's a totally different culture. If you've never experienced that culture, and the youngsters are growing up with good trade degrees and could get a job, they really don't know anything else. So they don't know if they're missing something or they're not missing something. I know in my case how I am as a person. I couldn't have grown up down here unless I, just got fed in with it. Might play a lot of cricket. My son is adapting to it because he's that sort of boy. But we hear today from Imbris about, the jobs coming in. But the jobs are still not coming in the numbers that I want to see Cornwall succeed. I don't know what your views are on the culture problem. It's something that
it's a very you have some really good things and you have some difficult things. So so you have this strong connection with London because a lot of Londoners come on holiday in Cornwall, and compared to what they have in London, Cornwall has some really great things to offer. The whole surfing culture, the whole there is some really attractive stuff for young people in Cornwall. I guess issues are about seasonality and about that kind of thing you were talking about the kind of vitality in everyday life and the ability to get around, especially thinking about accessibility, but then, you know, some people like isolation. So I think there are a lot of things that will attract a younger generation, which is more aware of green issues than previously, which is more keen to perhaps reconnect with nature. The difficulty then is as shown in Simon Reeves's story, you know, starting a business, given the prices and given the high demand for premises and housing, and the high, you know, the fact that you have a marketplace distorted by that wealth from London is a real challenge for you. I think compared to other parts of rural England, you know, some of those things are much more difficult in Cornwall than they would be in other places where it would be cheaper to get yourself a foot in the door in respect of doing something, you know, having a business or building a home or settling as a young person. I think there are kind of ways round that, and it is all about seeing opportunities where something can develop. So I'll talk again about an agricultural thing because that's where I have the most experience, I suppose. I think it's great that in Cornwall at the moment, all your milk is processed locally. That is a huge achievement. There are so many other places in the country where milk is an extracted product. It just goes off and the added value opportunities are completely lost. But how does somebody get started in a milk business? You know, it's a hugely capital intensive industry now for the successful businesses. But there are ways of looking at the system, and actually now there's been a commitment announced recently among the dairies that male dairy calves are not going to be killed and they're all going to be kept for the first 8 weeks. Now, to rear a male dairy calf to develop a product is actually a very cheap way to get into farming. And actually we have more people who want to get into farming than can actually do it. These things are really, they really are tricky to make any generalizations about. You have to see the opportunities and you have to provide those, and it has to be a kind of exciting business opportunity for people. And that's about presenting these things as positives rather than as negatives. So, you know, people say, oh, farming, long hours, drudgery, difficult, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, farming, your own boss, beautiful natural environment, you know, lots of potential positives about it.
One last quick question. I mean, but not everybody wants to come here and surf, do they? I mean, there's things like you're kind of respect generalising there a bit because I hate, you know, I hate what I don't have a shower, but I can't swim. Townie, never went swimming. But you mentioned about businesses within the rural concept, rural area. My villages, you know, I'm quite rural, but in my own village there's nothing. You know, probably there's about 20 people working from home on their own. Then I go to St Stephen's, which is the biggest village, and we've done this special thing which the rest of the panel has seen on the Clay network area. Well, we've got a chap, Hawkins Motors, that can take on 1 apprentice a year, and that's our biggest business. Again, there's going to be people moving in from home. So I'm trying to work out from experts like yourself what I need or what help I need to, when we sit down, the chairman makes his call on what we're going to put forward. How can I influence the rural area where at the moment we've discussed it? There's zero potential for our rural area. To start up businesses, or you know, you can still keep doing these micro businesses, but some of them don't employ anybody. I used to run a publishing company, but I didn't employ anybody. I could do it all myself, but I find it difficult where I'm going to create these jobs from.
I mean, again, I'm coming back to the same issue, but I think you can't put the risk on an individual sole trader to do something like take on an apprentice, because it's too big a risk for them, because they can't guarantee that they can offer something that's going to be viable and lasting. But you can do it if you've got 10 businesses working together, because the risk is shared. And that applies to both, you know, employment and capital investment. So I do think networks are really important in this context. And how you build those will differ depending on the sectors that you're dealing with and what people's existing social networks are and what their supply chains are. So then the way to build the network will have to vary depending on what your what you're examining. But if you're a sole trader who's publishing, there may be certain types of kit that could be shared. In other countries, in France, for example, lots of things are done in this way, and it's done because people are used to working in groups and used to making common, we'll all put a bit in so that we can get something. You see that in the social domain, in parish councils and things to a degree, but I think in the business domain, there's not as much of it as you would find in other countries on the continent.
Okay, sorry, Mike, thanks for those points. We need to move on now. So I'm going to ask Jane if she can come forward, please.
Yes. Did you want me to be quick? I know you're running short of time. Thank you. That was really, really interesting, Janet. I'm just wondering about the tourist tax. And incidentally, I think you pay it in Malta too, don't we? I'm sure I did. But do you not think that the second homeowners would feel more involved and would contribute more if they felt they were actually paying, for services? Because sometimes they're not paying for their refuse and they're not paying things. Do you think sometimes if you're paying for something, I think you might become more involved? I'm not sure. That's a psychological thing with them, but we don't cover ourselves in glory with them. They do spend a lot of money in the county. So why don't we get them to spend even more and contribute for the fact that they've got that privilege of living here?
I mean, it seems to me, to be fair, I have to come clean and say I'm a second homeowner, but not in this country. Inheriting from my parents, I have an eighth of a house in Normandy, and in the commune where our house is, we do contribute. We do pay a rate. We do contribute to a number of communal services because that's the way that things are organised there. I don't even know if we get any reduction in. I think we might get a little bit of reduction like you do in this country for a second home compared to what you would be paying if it were your principal residence. I think for people who buy a home and who want to come down, they do already feel a sense of identity with the place that they have their second home in, apart from the one that Liz was talking about. I couldn't even remember where it was. But, I think generally it is quite a big investment for most of us to make. There are some people who are so wealthy who it makes no difference to, but for most people who are in a position to make that kind of decision, it would be an investment and they would want to feel a sense of responsibility. And it's then about as she said, if you're going to do that, you then at the same time, you need to have ways of trying to involve them in community life so that they feel, that in a sense it's a reciprocated relationship. So, getting parish newsletters, especially if they're sent electronically, they could be sent anywhere across the country, can't they? They don't have to only drop on your doorstep when you're there. But yeah, I mean, it seems to me perfectly fair that if you've got a home, then you contribute.
Yes, well, I just wondered if it would make them feel more part of the community if they are sharing that. The other thing I was going to ask you, they formed the Trade and Agricultural Commission. Are you confident, for food standards and animal welfare, are you confident that they're going to be heard well enough and it'll make a difference? Because I know farmers are very, very worried about that. And I just wondered what your I come from southeast Cornwall, where we're predominantly agriculture in this area.
I think, I think this is when we get into geopolitics a little bit. I think if we manage to have a trade deal with the European Union, it's more likely that those standards will be maintained. I think we would be more vulnerable if we didn't have a trade deal with Europe, because then we would have to look elsewhere to get trade deals. And our first port of call, if Mr. Trump had been re-elected, then our first port of call would have been the USA, and then I would have been seriously concerned because they have various reasons to want to change our standards so that they can trade more freely with us in goods where they see they have a market advantage. Having said that, now that we've got a different outcome from the US election, and we've got the prospects, she says, fingers crossed, touching wood, of a deal with Europe. And we also have mobilized through this process, quite a strong movement of both people in the kind of foodie stakeholder community, so people like Tim Lang and other people who work on sort of sustainable food systems, as well as the farming sector, pushing very strongly for this commitment. The government won't sign up to a commitment in legislation because that ties their hands too much, and it goes too much against the grain of free trade ways of operating, which is, very core to the heart of the current government. But they have made so many public statements now saying that they will uphold standards and that they recognise it's really important. And at the end of the day, it will though come down to how much of a role those sectors play in international negotiations over trade, and the risk is always that food is not seen as the most important item for the UK in respect of trade, so it becomes a sacrificial thing if you're not careful. But you can't ignore a groundswell of public support. So I think it would have to be, I mean, it's like there's been lots of discussion about what will happen with GM after Brexit, and will we start growing GM? And I'm actually someone who sits on the fence with GM, because I think it depends on exactly what products you're looking at and how well they've been tested, whether they can or can't be used. That comes from my training originally as a botanist before I got into what I do now. But at the same time, I think it's really interesting that there's been no real radical move by government, because there is a huge amount of consumer suspicion of GM, and that's important, that's powerful, and that will change the behaviour of supermarkets. And if the supermarkets aren't interested, then why should the government be interested? Because the supermarkets are hugely powerful in all this, and they employ loads and loads of people, and they generate a lot of wealth for the UK.
Yeah. The other thing is, you all know that Cornwall Council has its own farms with tenants, and they have been investing some money into some of those farms at the moment. But should they be expanding at this time? I mean, you talked that there weren't enough farms for farmers and people interested in agriculture to go into farming, and I often hear from farmers, the second generations, there just aren't enough farms for them to take as tenant farmers to get started. So do you think it is a time now when we're looking to produce more at home too?
Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be wonderful? The trend has been the other way among all local authorities across the country for quite some time, because when there's fees, that's something they get rid of. And in the sector as a whole, this hollowing out of opportunities for young people, because the only way, when you're already in a farm, if it's not making a lot of money and you want to try and make it make more money, your first tactic is almost always to try and get bigger. And what that then does is mean, there are fewer farms to go round, and to get one, you have to be that much more wealthy when somebody's transferring it. So it is a kind of treadmill thing that we need to break the cycle of. I have done a fair bit of work in France over the years, and the French start their policies by saying we don't want to lose more people from farming. We want, if anything, to have more people in farming than we do now. And I'm absolutely with them. I think in the future, if we're talking about a value-added and more diverse landscape that respects its natural capital, that maintains its ecosystem services, we need more people managing that landscape and doing it in a way which is productive and gives a good return. So if you look at, say, a sector like the dairy sector, we have a trend towards these massive farms where the animals are stressed, the people are stressed, the product is very low value, and the return to the local area is very thin. And then you look at some of these micro dairy businesses who've made a really good job of adding value locally, with smaller numbers of cows kept in different ways and marketing direct and appealing to a different sort of consumer who wants something that's not been homogenized and industrialized. And they're really successful. But, you might not be able to run the whole of the dairy sector on that basis. But in Cornwall, actually, maybe you could do sort of interesting different things. So I'm all for... I would be really pleased if you could make the case for retaining and maybe expanding the council's farm holdings and offering opportunities for tenants